Hello guys, have you ever stopped to wonder why certain beliefs cross centuries and remain alive in the 21st century? Why does spilling salt still make you throw a pinch over your shoulder? Why do we avoid black cats or knock on wood 3 times? Today, you'll discover that these superstitions didn't just appear out of nowhere. They have surprisingly practical, logical, and often fascinating roots in human history. Stay until the end to understand how the past still whispers in your ears, shaping small gestures of your daily life. Now get comfortable, turn off the lights, take a deep breath, and enjoy this journey through time. Imagine, for a moment, a rustic wooden table somewhere in medieval Europe. The flickering light of candles gently projects dancing shadows on stone walls. The air carries the dense aroma of stew simmering in an iron pot, mixed with the smell of freshly baked bread and smoke escaping from the fireplace. At this table, among clay bowls and tin spoons, rests something precious, more valuable at that moment than you could imagine. A small container of salt. Salt. This white crystal that today we buy for a few cents at the supermarket was once as valuable as gold. In ancient Rome, soldiers received part of their payment in salt. That's where the word salary comes from. Caravans crossed scorching deserts, risking their lives on dangerous trade routes just to transport this essential mineral. Entire cities prospered or disappeared depending on their access to salt mines or coastal salt pans. Why such value? Because salt was life. In an era without refrigeration, without supermarkets open 24 hours, without the possibility of ordering food on your cell phone, salt was the only reliable method of preserving meat, fish, and vegetables for the long winters. It was the difference between surviving and starving. It was medicine, a medium of exchange, a symbol of purity and hospitality. Now imagine spilling this treasure. In a peasant family that barely managed to survive, where every grain counted, where the next bag of salt could take months to acquire, spilling salt wasn't just an accident, it was a small domestic tragedy. It was the waste of something irreplaceable. It was literally throwing money away. And so the superstition was born. The bad luck of spilling salt had nothing mystical in its origin. It was pure pragmatism disguised as belief. It was a way of teaching children through fear and caution the importance of not wasting this vital resource. Be careful, spilling salt brings bad luck was more effective than long economic explanations for a 5-year-old child in the Middle Ages. But what about throwing salt over your left shoulder? This part of the superstition has even more interesting layers. In medieval Christian tradition, it was believed that the devil lurked over people's left shoulder, waiting for moments of weakness or bad luck to attack. Spilling salt, at this moment of carelessness, was seen as an opening for bad luck or malevolent influence. Throwing a pinch of salt over your left shoulder would then be a way to blind the devil, to drive him away, to neutralize bad luck with a gesture of purification. Think about it. How many times have you already seen someone make this gesture almost automatically? Maybe you yourself have done it without even thinking about why. It's fascinating how a habit born from economic scarcity and medieval fear still echoes in modern kitchens, amid stainless steel refrigerators and cheap plastic salt shakers. But salt is not the only superstition with practical roots. Let's travel now to the narrow and shadowy streets of medieval European cities. Streets where sewage ran in the open, where waste was thrown from windows with a warning shout, where the bubonic plague could emerge at any moment, carried by rats that multiplied in the darkness. In this scenario, another creature emerges wrapped in superstition, the black cat. Black cats, especially during the Middle Ages, were associated with witchcraft, the devil, bad luck. Women who owned black cats were frequently accused of being witches, an accusation that could lead to torture and death by fire. But where did this specific association come from? Part of the answer lies in the very nature of cats. Nocturnal creatures, silent, with eyes that shine in the darkness, cats have always had an air of mystery. They hunt rats. And rats, in medieval mentality, were impure creatures associated with disease and death. An animal that dealt so intimately with these evil creatures surely must have had something supernatural about it, people thought. Furthermore, black cats were practically invisible at night. Imagine walking down a medieval street in the dark without public lighting, only the weak moon as a guide, and suddenly stumbling over a black cat you couldn't see. The fright, the fear, the fall, all of this could be interpreted as bad luck brought by the animal. There's also a darker and more practical theory. During plague epidemics, authorities and the population, desperate for explanations, began killing cats en masse, believing they spread the disease. With fewer cats on the streets, the rat population, the true carriers of infected fleas, exploded, making the epidemics even worse. The bad luck of black cats was, ironically, the bad luck that humanity itself created by eliminating them. Today, in the 21st century, with all our science and technology, there are still people who change sidewalks when they see a black cat crossing their path. Animal shelters report that black cats are the least adopted precisely because of this ancient superstition. The echo of the past still resonates, even when logic tells us there's no reason to fear. And what about knocking on wood? This simple gesture, made almost unconsciously when we mention something good we don't want to jinx, has origins that trace back to pagan traditions long before Christianity. In ancient Celtic and Nordic cultures, it was believed that benevolent spirits lived inside trees, especially oaks, ashes, and hawthorns. These trees were sacred, seen as portals between the human world and the spiritual world. When someone needed protection, good luck, or wanted to give thanks for a blessing, they would touch the tree to connect with these protective spirits. With the Christianization of Europe, many of these pagan practices were adapted. Touching wood became associated with the cross of Christ made of wood, becoming a gesture of Christian protection. But the essence remained, wood as a symbol of connection with something greater, something protective. Think about the practicality of this too. In an era where most buildings, tools, and everyday objects were made of wood, this material was always within reach. It was easy to touch a beam, a table, a door. The gesture became as natural as breathing. And today, how many times have you already knocked on wood? Or on something that looks like wood, like a Formica table, without even noticing? How many times have you said something positive and immediately looked for wood nearby, just to be safe? This small ritual, born in sacred forests thousands of years ago, still lives in modern offices, in living rooms, in casual conversations. If you're enjoying discovering the fascinating origins of these superstitions, consider subscribing to the channel to help our community grow and receive notifications whenever we publish new stories like this one. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there? It's fascinating for us to know where our community is spread across the world. But there is a superstition that transcends cultures, continents, and centuries. One that gives chills even to the most skeptical. A combination that for many still carries an inexplicable weight of apprehension. And if you think you already understand where the fear comes from, prepare yourself. The true origin may be more complex and surprising than any urban legend you've ever heard. The date is marked on the calendar, Friday the 13th. For millions of people around the world, especially in the United States, this day carries an invisible weight. an inexplicable tension. There are those who avoid traveling, who cancel important appointments, who simply prefer to stay home, waiting for the hours to pass without incident. There's even a clinical name for this fear, paraskevidekatriophobia, the irrational fear of Friday the 13th. But where does this specific dread come from? Why exactly this combination, Friday and the number 13, has become synonymous with bad luck in so many Western cultures? The answer is not in a single event, but in the fascinating convergence of two ancient superstitions that, when they meet, create something far more powerful than the sum of their parts. Let's start with the number 13. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself in a grand hall in ancient Scandinavia, more than 1,000 years ago. The walls are adorned with tapestries that tell stories of gods and heroes. Fire crackles in enormous fireplaces, casting elongated shadows. Viking warriors with their braided beards and leather armor are seated at long wooden tables, drinking mead from decorated horns. The air is thick with the smell of roasted meat and fermented beer. It is in this setting that one of the oldest legends about the number 13 is born, the Norse myth of Loki and the banquet of Valhalla. According to Norse mythology, there was a banquet in Valhalla, the hall of the gods, to which 12 deities were invited. Everything proceeded in harmony until Loki, the trickster and malicious god, appeared uninvited, becoming the 13th guest. His presence triggered a series of events that culminated in the death of Balder, the most beloved god, symbol of light and goodness. The chaos that followed marked the beginning of Ragnarok, the end of the world in Norse mythology. 13 guests, death, chaos, the end. This narrative penetrated deeply into the collective consciousness of Nordic peoples, and through Viking invasions and the subsequent Christianization of Europe, spread across the continent. But there is another story, even more well known in the Western world, that reinforced the fear of the number 13, the Last Supper. Imagine now a modest room in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. The golden light of dusk enters through small windows, illuminating a low table where 13 men are gathered. The smell of unleavened bread and wine fills the space. It is Passover, and Jesus Christ is sharing his last meal with the 12 apostles. 13 people at the table. That night, one of those present, Judas Iscariot, often identified as the 13th to sit down, would betray Jesus, leading to his crucifixion on the following Friday. The association was made, 13 people gathered, betrayal, death. This biblical narrative, deeply rooted in Western Christian culture, transformed the number 13 into a symbol of betrayal and bad luck. For centuries, in medieval Europe and later in American colonies, people avoided having 13 people at the table. It was believed that if this happened, one of them would die within a year. Hotels began to skip the 13th floor. Have you noticed? Many buildings in the United States go from the 12th to the 14th floor, as if the 13 simply didn't exist. Airplanes frequently don't have row 13. Formula One avoided using the number 13 on cars for decades. Even today, this superstition shapes architecture, design, and business decisions. But the number 13 alone doesn't completely explain Friday the 13th. We need to understand the other side of this equation. Why Friday? Come back with me to that table in Jerusalem. Jesus was crucified on a Friday, the day Christians call Good Friday, or Passion Friday. For medieval Christians, Friday already carried a shadow of sadness and solemnity. It was a day of fasting, of penance, of remembering Christ's sacrifice. But there are even older layers. In Christian tradition, it was also believed that Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit on a Friday, initiating humanity's fall. That the Great Flood began on a Friday. That the Tower of Babel was destroyed on a Friday. Friday was the day when God punished the day when great misfortunes happened. Furthermore, in medieval England, Friday was the traditional day of public executions. Crowds gathered in squares to watch hangings, beheadings, and other forms of capital punishment. The executioner was often called Jack Friday. The association between Friday and death was literal, visceral, impossible to ignore. Now imagine the mentality of a medieval peasant or merchant. Friday was already a dark day, laden with heavy religious meanings and memories of public violence. The number 13 was already avoided as a symbol of betrayal and death. When these two elements combined, Friday the 13th, it was as if the universe conspired to create the perfect day for bad luck. But here's something fascinating. The specific superstition of Friday the 13th, as we know it today, is relatively recent. There are no solid historical records of this specific combination being considered unlucky before the 19th century. It was only in 1907 that the superstition exploded into American popular consciousness, thanks to a novel called Friday the 13th, written by Thomas William Lawson. The book tells the story of a Wall Street broker who specifically chooses a Friday the 13th to manipulate the stock market and cause a financial collapse. The novel was a resounding success. It sold millions of copies. And suddenly, Friday the 13th was not just a superstitious curiosity. It was a date associated with financial disasters, conspiracies, and deliberate chaos. Fiction fed the superstition, and superstition fed more fiction. Decades later, in 1980, the horror film Friday the 13th definitively cemented the date in popular imagination as synonymous with horror and violence. The franchise spawned 12 films, a TV series, and countless references in pop culture. Jason Voorhees, the masked killer, became inseparable from the date. Think about it. A superstition that barely existed 150 years ago now costs the American economy approximately $800 to $900 million every Friday the 13th, due to people who avoid traveling, doing business, or making large purchases. Airlines report significant drops in reservations, weddings are rescheduled, elective surgeries are postponed. And here's the fascinating parallel with our current times. We live in an era of unprecedented information. We have instant access to facts, statistics, scientific studies that repeatedly prove that Friday the 13th is not statistically more dangerous than any other day. And yet the superstition persists. Why? Because superstitions are not about logic, they're about narrative. They're about the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of the chaos of the world. When something bad happens on a Friday the 13th, we remember it. When something bad happens on a Tuesday the 17th or a Thursday the 8th, we forget it. Our brains are programmed to find patterns even where they don't exist. This is what psychologists call confirmation bias. We seek evidence that confirms our beliefs and ignore evidence that contradicts them. If you believe Friday the 13th is unlucky, you'll pay more attention to small incidents on that day: the coffee you spilled, the traffic you hit, the email that didn't arrive, and you'll attribute them to the date, reinforcing your belief. There's also the phenomenon of the self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe something bad will happen, you may unconsciously act in a more anxious, more careless, more tense way, increasing the probability that something really does go wrong. Your belief creates the reality you feared. But perhaps the most interesting question is not why is Friday the 13th considered unlucky, but rather why do we need unlucky days? Superstitions give us a sense of control in a fundamentally unpredictable world. If we can identify dangerous days, we can avoid them. If we can perform protective rituals, throwing salt, knocking on wood, avoiding black cats, we can feel safer. It's an illusion, of course, but it's a comforting illusion. In the Middle Ages, when life was brutal, short, and full of real dangers, incurable diseases, constant wars, famine, violence, superstitions offered a framework for understanding chaos. Today, even with all our technology and advanced medicine, we still face uncertainties, diseases, accidents, economic crises, climate change. The threats have changed, but the human need to find patterns and create protective rituals remains. And so Friday the 13th continues to exist, not because it's really dangerous, but because it serves a deep psychological function. It's a day on which we can project our fears, a temporal scapegoat for the anxiety we carry every day. Curiously, not all cultures share this fear. In Italy, the unlucky number is 17, not 13. In China, the number 4 is avoided because its pronunciation is similar to the word death. In many Hispanic cultures, it's Tuesday the 13th, not Friday, that is considered unlucky. Bad luck, it seems, is culturally specific. This leads us to an intriguing reflection. If different cultures have different superstitions, doesn't this prove they are all human constructions, not universal truths? And if they are constructions, why do we continue to believe in them? Perhaps because deep down, superstitions are not about truth. They're about belonging. When you throw salt over your shoulder, when you avoid walking under a ladder, when you feel a chill down your spine on a Friday the 13th, you're participating in a ritual shared by millions of people across the centuries. You're connecting with your ancestors, with your community, with a narrative larger than yourself. And there's beauty in that, even if it's irrational. But not all superstitions are as harmless as avoiding a date on the calendar. Some were born from very real fears and had tragic consequences in human history. Some led to persecution, violence, death of the innocent, and one of the most devastating is linked to an object you probably have in your house, leaning against the wall or stored in a closet, waiting silently to be used. You are walking down the sidewalk on an ordinary day. Ahead, someone is at the top of a ladder, painting the facade of a shop or changing a light bulb. The ladder is leaning against the wall, forming a perfect triangle with the ground. You could easily pass underneath it, saving a few seconds. But something makes you hesitate. You swerve, go around, take a few extra steps. Why, if you ask? The answer will probably be, it's bad luck to pass under a ladder. But few can explain why. This superstition is so ingrained in our behavior that we follow it almost unconsciously, like an automatic reflex. The origin of this belief has fascinating layers, some practical, others deeply symbolic. Let's start with the most obvious: physical safety. Imagine a busy street in 18th century London. The sidewalks are narrow, made of irregular stones. Horse-drawn carriages pass noisily, raising dust and mud. Workers climb up and down unstable wooden ladders carrying buckets of paint, heavy tools, ceramic tiles. These ladders don't have modern safety systems. No locks, no non-slip bases, often leaning at precarious angles. Passing under one of these ladders was genuinely dangerous. The person on top could drop something, paint, tools, or even lose their balance and fall on you. Or your movement as you passed could destabilize the ladder, causing an accident. The bad luck of passing under a ladder was in fact the very real risk of being hit by something or causing a fall. It was easier to teach children passing under a ladder brings bad luck than to explain physics, gravity, and accident probabilities. The superstition was an educational tool disguised as a mystical belief. But there is an even deeper symbolic layer, rooted in sacred geometry and medieval Christian tradition. When a ladder is leaning against a wall, it forms a triangle. And the triangle, in Christian symbolism, represents the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Passing under this triangle was seen as a violation of sacred space, a break in divine harmony, almost a blasphemy. More than that, passing through the triangle was breaking the Trinity, separating what should remain united. It was an act of spiritual disrespect that, it was believed, would attract divine punishment or open space for evil forces to enter the person's life. There is also a darker connection. In medieval Europe, ladders were often leaned against gallows where criminals were hanged. The condemned climbed the ladder, the rope was placed around his neck, and then the ladder was removed, leaving him suspended. Passing under a ladder evoked symbolically the image of passing under a gallows, an omen of death. Think about how these layers accumulate: real physical danger, deep religious symbolism, association with executions and death. It's no wonder the superstition became so powerful. And today, modern ladders are much safer. We have safety regulations, certified equipment, work protocols. The real risk has decreased dramatically, but the superstition remains passed down from generation to generation, often without people knowing why. It's fascinating to observe how we behave in relation to this. Even people who claim to be completely rational, who laugh at superstitions, often swerve around ladders just to be safe or just to not risk it. It's as if, at some deep level, we prefer not to test the universe. If you're discovering surprising connections between the past and your current habits, leave a like on this video so more people can find these fascinating stories. And in the comments, tell us, do you swerve around ladders or do you pass underneath without thinking twice? But not all superstitions involve avoiding something. Some involve active gestures, small rituals we perform to attract luck or ward off bad luck. And one of the most universal is crossing your fingers. You've probably done this today. Maybe while waiting for the result of something important, while making a wish, while hoping something works out. It's such a natural gesture that we barely notice when we do it. But where does this idea come from that crossing two fingers can influence destiny? The most accepted origin traces back to early Christianity, at a time when being Christian was dangerous, punishable by imprisonment, torture, or death. Imagine the Roman Empire in the 2nd or 3rd century. Christianity is still a persecuted religion practiced in secret. Christians gather in underground catacombs in private homes, always afraid of being discovered. They need discreet ways to identify each other without drawing the attention of authorities. One of these ways was the fish symbol, two arcs that cross, forming the silhouette of a fish, a secret acronym for Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior, in Greek. But there was another gesture, even more discreet, crossing your fingers. When two Christians met, each would extend their index finger and cross them, forming a cross, the central symbol of their faith. It was a sign of mutual recognition, of solidarity, of shared protection. It was believed that this gesture invoked the power of Christ's cross, offering spiritual protection and blessings. Over time, as Christianity became the dominant religion in Europe, the gesture evolved. Instead of two people crossing their fingers, a single person began to cross the index finger over the middle finger of the same hand. A portable and personal version of the cross symbol. Crossing your fingers became a silent request for divine protection, a physical prayer, a bodily talisman against evil. It was especially used when making an oath or promise, as a way to ask God to witness and protect the truth of the words. Curiously, this same origin gave rise to a completely opposite use, crossing your fingers hidden behind your back while telling a lie. The idea was that the cross would cancel out the lie, protecting the person from the spiritual consequences of breaking an oath. It was a creative and ethically questionable theological loophole. Today we cross our fingers for luck, for hope, for superstition, often without any religious connotation. Athletes cross their fingers before a competition. Students cross their fingers before receiving a grade. People cross their fingers when buying a lottery ticket. The gesture has transcended its Christian origin and become universal, a human symbol of hope against uncertainty. And there's something profoundly comforting about it. The idea that such a simple gesture can somehow influence the outcome of events. Of course, rationally, we know that crossing your fingers doesn't change statistical probabilities. It doesn't make you pass a test you didn't study for. It doesn't make your team win the game. It doesn't make it rain during a drought. But psychologically, the gesture has power. Studies in behavioral psychology show that performing luck rituals, even if the person doesn't rationally believe in them, can increase confidence, reduce anxiety, and even improve performance on tasks. Not because the ritual itself has magical power, but because it calms the mind, creates a sense of control, and allows the person to concentrate better. Crossing your fingers is a psychological placebo, and placebos work even when we know they're placebos. There's also the social aspect. When you tell someone, "I'm crossing my fingers for you," you're communicating empathy, support, solidarity. The gesture has become an emotional language, a way of saying, "I'm rooting for you," without words. But while crossing your fingers is a gesture of hope, there is another gesture, or rather, an accidental event, that carries the opposite weight: breaking a mirror. 7 years of bad luck. That's the traditional sentence for breaking a mirror. 7 full years of misfortune, of bad things going wrong. It's one of the most specific and frightening superstitions. Not just bad luck, but an exact amount of time. Why 7 years? And why are mirrors so special? To understand this, we need to go back to a time when mirrors were rare, precious, and deeply mysterious objects. Before the industrial production of glass, mirrors were made of polished metals: bronze, silver, copper. They were expensive, accessible only to the very wealthy. Seeing your own reflection was an uncommon experience for most people. Many medieval peasants lived entire lives without ever seeing a clear image of their own face. Mirrors were magic, literally. They captured your image, created a visual duplicate of you. In cultures around the world, it was believed that the reflection in the mirror was not just an image, but part of your soul, your spirit, your vital essence. The ancient Greeks and Romans practiced katoptromancy, divination through mirrors. They believed mirrors could reveal the future, show hidden truths, even capture souls. Breaking a mirror, therefore, was not just destroying a valuable object, it was wounding your own soul. But why specifically 7 years of bad luck? The Romans believed that human life renewed itself in cycles of 7 years. Every 7 years, the body regenerated completely, the person essentially reborn. If you broke a mirror, and therefore wounded your soul, it would take one complete life cycle, 7 full years, for your soul to recover completely. It was spiritual mathematics. A wounded soul needed one complete renewal cycle to heal. There were also practical considerations. Mirrors were so expensive that breaking one was a financial disaster. For a middle-class family, a mirror could represent months or even years of savings. Breaking one was literally breaking a fortune. The bad luck was very real. It was the poverty resulting from the loss. Creating a severe superstition around breaking mirrors was a way of teaching extreme care when handling such valuable objects. If you believed breaking it would bring 7 years of bad luck, you would be infinitely more careful. Today, mirrors are cheap. You can buy one for a few dollars at any store. Breaking it is an inconvenience, not a financial catastrophe. And it certainly doesn't wound your soul, is because our understanding of reflections has changed completely. We know it's just reflected light, optical physics, nothing mystical. And yet when a mirror breaks, many people feel a knot in their stomach, a moment of what if. Even laughing at the superstition, there's that irrational discomfort. Some even perform rituals to break the curse, burying the pieces, throwing them in running water, waiting 7 hours before cleaning up the shards, 1 hour for each year of bad luck. These are invented rituals with no real historical basis, but they offer psychological comfort. And perhaps that's what all these superstitions really do. They offer structure to chaos, rituals to chance, narratives to randomness. They tell us there are reasons for things, that there are patterns, that there are ways to protect ourselves, even when we know rationally that there aren't. But there is a category of superstitions that goes beyond the personal. Superstitions that shaped entire societies, that influenced architecture, economics, and even legislation. Superstitions so powerful that their echoes still reverberate in our modern cities, in our buildings, in our streets. And one of the most fascinating involves something you see every day, but probably never stopped to question. Above the entrance door, hung on a barn wall, tattooed on skin, the horseshoe is one of the most recognized symbols of good luck in the Western world. You've seen it countless times, in homes, in jewelry, in amulets, in company logos. But have you ever stopped to think why a curved piece of metal, originally intended to protect horses' hooves, became a universal talisman of fortune? The story of the horseshoe as a symbol of luck is a fascinating journey through millennia, connecting ancient metallurgy, pagan beliefs, Christian legends, and very real economic practices. Let's start with the material, iron. Come back with me to the Iron Age, about 3,000 years ago. Imagine a village surrounded by dense forests where the sound of hammers hitting anvils echoes through the smoke of forges. The blacksmith is a central, almost magical figure, someone who transforms common stones into shining metal, who molds fire and earth into tools, weapons, objects of power. Iron was revolutionary. Stronger than bronze, more abundant, more versatile. But for common people, the process of transforming iron ore into usable metal seemed magical. The blacksmith would place stones in the fire, murmur words in reality, calculating temperatures and times, and produce something completely different. It was alchemy before alchemy. In Celtic, Norse, Germanic, and many other cultures, iron was considered a sacred metal with protective properties. It was believed that iron could ward off evil spirits, mischievous fairies, demons, and witches. Why? Because iron came from the earth. It was born from the soil, forged by fire, shaped by water in cooling, and tempered by air. It embodied the four fundamental elements. More importantly, iron was rare enough to be valuable, but common enough to be accessible. Unlike gold or silver, which only the wealthy possessed, iron was present in everyday life, in knives, in locks, in nails. It was the metal of the people, the democratic protector. Nailing a piece of iron above the door was a common practice throughout medieval Europe. Not just horseshoes, any iron would do. But horseshoes had special advantages. First, the shape. The horseshoe is a U or C-shaped curve, a shape that, when turned with the points upwards, looks like a container, a cup, something that can hold good luck and prevent it from escaping. When turned with the points downwards, luck pours over those who pass underneath. There are heated debates even today about which orientation is correct. And the answer varies from culture to culture, from region to region. In Ireland and Great Britain, traditionally, horseshoes are hung with the points upwards to hold luck. In the United States, you find both orientations, often with contradictory explanations about which is right. The truth is, there is no definitive answer. It's local tradition, passed down through generations, each with its own logic. Second, the origin. Horseshoes come from horses, and horses were symbols of power, wealth, and status. Only wealthy people owned horses. To have a horseshoe, even a used, discarded one, was to possess a piece of that world of privilege. It was aspirational. Furthermore, horseshoes were made by blacksmiths, and blacksmiths, as I mentioned, were almost mystical figures. An object forged by a blacksmith carried part of his magic. It was blessed by fire, shaped by skill, imbued with protection, but there is a specific legend that cemented the horseshoe as a symbol of luck in Christian tradition, the legend of St. Dunstan and the devil. Dunstan was an Archbishop of Canterbury in the 10th century, but before his religious life, he was a skilled blacksmith. According to legend, one day the devil himself appeared in Dunstan's forge, disguised as a common traveller, and asked Dunstan to shoe his hooves, because the devil, in this story, had cloven hooves like a goat. Dunstan, realizing who his client was, agreed. But he deliberately made the process extremely painful, clamping the devil firmly and brutally hammering the horseshoes. The devil screamed in pain and begged to be released. Dunstan agreed to release him on one condition. The devil had to promise never to enter any place where a horseshoe was hung above the door. The devil, desperate, agreed, and so, according to legend, horseshoes above doors ensure that the devil, and by extension, any evil, can never enter. It's a charming story, mixing Christian elements with earlier pagan practices. And it worked. The legend spread throughout Europe and, later, to the Americas with the colonizers. Horseshoes became ubiquitous in homes, barns, stables, taverns, but there is also a practical reason often forgotten. Horseshoes were valuable. Iron was expensive. Horseshoes were custom-made by skilled blacksmiths. When a horse lost a horseshoe on the road, which happened frequently on uneven stone paths, finding one was like finding money on the ground. You could sell it back to a blacksmith, trade it for goods, or use it yourself if you owned a horse. Finding a horseshoe was literally having luck. Financial, tangible, immediate luck. The superstition was born from economic reality. And here's the fascinating parallel with modern times. We still attribute luck to finding objects. Finding a coin on the ground is considered lucky, even if it's only a few cents, much less valuable than a horseshoe was. Finding a four-leaf clover is lucky, although it has no monetary value at all. The psychology remains. Finding something rare makes us feel special, chosen, fortunate. Today, decorative horseshoes are sold in craft stores made of plastic, painted gold, never having touched a horse. But people still buy them, still hang them, still believe, or want to believe, that they bring luck. There's something deeply human in this desire. We want talismans, we want physical symbols of protection and fortune. We want to believe that we can influence destiny through objects, gestures, rituals. And perhaps we can, not because the objects have magical power, but because believing we are lucky makes us more confident, more optimistic, more likely to take calculated risks that can lead to success. The horseshoe doesn't bring luck. The belief in the horseshoe changes our behavior in ways that can create luck. But not all symbols of luck are so universally positive. Some have much darker histories, rooted in persecution, fear, and violence. And one of the most controversial is the rabbit's foot. You've probably seen one, a fuzzy keychain, dyed vibrant colors, hanging from bags or keys. It seems harmless, almost silly. But the story behind this lucky charm is deeply disturbing, especially in the United States. The rabbit's foot, as a lucky talisman, has roots in hoodoo practices, an African-American spiritual tradition that combines elements of West African religions, Native American practices, and Christianity. In hoodoo, animal parts were used in rituals and amulets, each with specific properties. Rabbits, due to their ability to reproduce quickly and their agility, were associated with fertility, speed, and the ability to escape danger. The foot, specifically, was seen as a symbol of quick movement and luck in avoiding problems. But here's where the story turns dark. During the era of slavery and later during segregation in the United States, the rabbit's foot was appropriated and commercialized in ways that perpetuated racist stereotypes. It was turned into a curiosity, an exotic superstition associated with enslaved people, and, later, with African American communities. Worse still, there were specific rules about which rabbit's foot brought luck. It should be the left hind foot caught in a cemetery at midnight on a full moon by a specific person. These rules were often invented or exaggerated to make the amulet more mysterious and marketable. In the 1900s, rabbit's feet became popular commercial products in the United States, sold in stores, catalogs, fairs. They were dyed bright colors turned into keychains, completely disconnected from any original spiritual meaning. The spiritual practice was transformed into merchandise, emptied of context, sold as a novelty. Today, most rabbit's feet sold aren't even real, they are synthetic imitations. And many people who own them have no idea of the complex and problematic history behind them. It's an important reminder: superstitions don't exist in a vacuum. They are shaped by cultural contexts, by power dynamics, by histories of oppression and appropriation. What seems like a harmless belief can have roots in real injustices. And this leads us to a broader reflection. How many of our everyday superstitions carry stories we don't know? How many times do we repeat gestures, rituals, beliefs without understanding where they came from or what they originally meant? Crossing fingers, knocking on wood, avoiding ladders, hanging horseshoes. All these gestures have layers of history, some inspiring, others disturbing. Knowing these stories doesn't necessarily make us stop performing the gestures, but it makes us more aware of the weight they carry. And there's another category of superstitions that deserves special attention, those related to animals. Black cats we've already mentioned, but there are many others. Owls, crows, spiders, butterflies. Each culture attributes different meanings to different creatures. In the United States, seeing a crow is often considered a bad omen. In Norse mythology, crows were messengers of Odin, symbols of wisdom. In Native American culture, the crow is often a trickster, a transformer, neither good nor bad, but complex. Owls are symbols of wisdom in ancient Greece, but omens of death in many European cultures. Spiders bring luck if seen in the morning, bad luck if seen at night, or vice versa depending on where you are. What determines if an animal is lucky or unlucky? Often it's a combination of observable behavior, ecological role, and cultural narratives accumulated over centuries. Nocturnal animals, owls, bats, black cats, tend to be viewed with suspicion in cultures where night is associated with danger. Animals that eat carrion, crows, vultures, are associated with death because they are literally present where there is death. Animals that appear before weather events, certain birds before storms, are seen as omens because, in reality, they are sensitive to changes in atmospheric pressure. Superstitions about animals are often ecological observations distorted through cultural lenses, but there is an animal whose superstition is almost universally positive, transcending cultures and continents: the butterfly. Butterflies are symbols of transformation, rebirth, soul. In cultures around the world, from ancient Greece to Mexico, from Japan to Ireland, butterflies are seen as spiritual messengers, symbols of positive change, bearers of good news. Why? Because their metamorphosis is visible, dramatic, miraculous. A crawling caterpillar encloses itself in a cocoon and emerges as a winged, colorful creature, completely transformed. It's a perfect metaphor for renewal, for hidden potential, for the possibility of radical change. Seeing a butterfly, especially in times of difficulty, is interpreted as a sign of hope that transformation is possible, that better days will come. It's a rare superstition because it's almost entirely positive. There are no buts or unlesses. Butterflies are universally welcomed, and perhaps that's what we most need from our superstitions. Not fear of bad luck, but hope for good luck. Not rituals to avoid evil, but symbols that remind us of the possibility of transformation, beauty, renewal. Because in the end, superstitions are stories we tell ourselves about how the world works. And the best stories are not those that fill us with fear, but those that fill us with hope. But there is a type of superstition that doesn't involve objects or animals, but rather actions. Things we do or avoid doing, everyday gestures loaded with meaning. And some of these actions are so ingrained in our behavior that we barely notice when we follow them. Like, for example, the way we react when someone sneezes. Someone sneezes, immediately, almost like a reflex, you say, "Bless you," or "health," if you're in a Portuguese-speaking country. It's automatic, polite, expected. But have you ever stopped to think about why we do this? Why does a sneeze, a simple, involuntary physical reaction, require a verbal response from those around you? The answer takes us to one of the oldest and most universal superstitions of humanity, rooted in very real fears about disease, death, and the fragility of human life. Let's go back to 6th century Europe during the papacy of Pope Gregory I, known as Gregory the Great. The bubonic plague was devastating the continent. Entire cities were decimated. Bodies accumulated in the streets faster than they could be buried. The air was heavy with the smell of death and the sound of lamentations. One of the first symptoms of the plague was sneezing, followed quickly by fever, swollen lymph nodes, dark spots on the skin, and, in most cases, death within days. Sneezing became synonymous with a death sentence. Pope Gregory, desperately trying to contain the epidemic through spiritual means, since medical means were practically non-existent, ordered that whenever someone sneezed, people around them should immediately pray for the person, asking for God's protection. "God bless you" was an urgent prayer, a desperate plea that the person was not, in fact, infected with the deadly plague. It was a response born from terror. Every sneeze could be the beginning of the end, but the association between sneezes and spiritual danger is even older than medieval plague. It traces back to beliefs that have existed for thousands of years in cultures around the world. In ancient Greece and Rome, it was believed that sneezing was a sign from the gods, an omen that could be good or bad, depending on the context. Sneezing to the right was good, to the left, bad. Sneezing once was neutral, 3 times in a row was especially significant. But there was an even deeper and more disturbing belief. The idea that when you sneeze, your soul could be expelled from your body. Think about the primitive logic behind this. When you sneeze, something invisible leaves you with force. Air, droplets, energy. For people who didn't understand respiratory physiology, who didn't know about germs or involuntary reflexes, it seemed plausible that this force could carry something essential. Your soul, your vital spirit, your essence. And if your soul left, what would happen? You would become vulnerable. Evil spirits could enter the empty space. Demons could possess your body. You could simply die emptied of life. Saying "bless you" or "God bless you" was a form of protection, a verbal barrier against these evil forces, a request that the soul remains safe inside the body, an invocation of divine protection at this moment of vulnerability. There was also the inverse belief that evil spirits could enter through an open mouth or nose during a sneeze. Covering your mouth when sneezing was not just hygiene, a concept that didn't exist in the way we understand it today. It was spiritual protection. In some cultures, it was said that the heart stopped momentarily during a sneeze. This belief, although anatomically incorrect, reinforced the idea that sneezing was a dangerous moment, a brief encounter with death, requiring verbal intervention to restart life. Interestingly, different cultures develop different verbal responses, but all with the same purpose: protection. In Spanish, salud, health. In German, Gesundheit, health. In Italian, salute, health. In Arabic, alhamdulillah, thanks be to God. In Hebrew, labriut, for health. In Mandarin, ibai sui, live 100 years. All these phrases in their different languages carry the same fundamental wish, that the person remain healthy, protected, alive. And today, we know exactly what a sneeze is. A reflex reaction to expel irritants from the nose. We know it doesn't expel the soul, that the heart doesn't stop, that it's not necessarily a sign of serious illness, and yet we continue to say bless you or health automatically. Why? Because the superstition has evolved into etiquette. What began as spiritual protection has transformed into social courtesy. Not responding to a sneeze can seem rude, cold, careless, even though we rationally know that no magical protection is necessary. If these connections between history and everyday behavior are fascinating you, consider sharing this video with someone who would also love to discover these surprising origins. And leave in the comments, which superstition do you follow without even noticing? But sneezes are not the only bodily function wrapped in superstition. There is another, much more common, that carries surprisingly varied meanings. Yawning. Yawning is universal. All humans yawn. Many animals yawn. It's one of the most basic and involuntary actions we perform, and yet it's surrounded by superstitions and beliefs that vary drastically from culture to culture. In medieval Europe, it was believed that yawning opened the mouth so wide that demons could enter. The solution? Cover your mouth when yawning, not out of politeness, but for spiritual protection. Making the sign of the cross over an open mouth was a common practice, a way to seal the entrance against evil forces. There was also the belief that the soul could escape through a yawn, similar to a sneeze. Yawning was seen as a moment of spiritual inattention, an opening for danger. In some African and Middle Eastern cultures, yawning was, and in some places still is, considered a sign that spirits are trying to communicate with you, or that you are particularly vulnerable to supernatural influences at that moment. Interestingly, there are also positive superstitions about yawning. In some traditions, yawning was seen as the body expelling negative energies, a form of spiritual cleansing. Yawning a lot was a sign that you were ridding yourself of the evil eye or accumulated envy. And there's the fascinating and scientifically proven observation. Yawns are contagious. Seeing someone yawn often makes us yawn too. Reading about yawning can make you yawn. Are you yawning now? Many people are. Before we understood mirror neurons and empathetic behavior, this contagion was seen as evidence of spiritual connection or energy transfer between people. If someone yawned and you yawned in response, it meant you were connected in some way, for better or worse. Today we know that yawning is a complex physiological response, possibly related to brain temperature regulation, oxygenation, state of alertness. Yawn contagion is linked to empathy and mirror neurons, not supernatural forces. But the etiquette remains. We cover our mouths when yawning, not just for hygiene, but because it was taught as polite, a transformation of spiritual protection into social norm. There is another involuntary bodily action that carries fascinating superstitions: hiccups. Hiccups are annoying, unpredictable, sometimes embarrassing. And throughout history, they have been interpreted in surprisingly varied ways. In some European cultures, it was believed that hiccups meant someone was speaking about you. Specifically, speaking badly about you. Each hiccup was a negative word being said about you somewhere. The only way to stop the hiccups was to guess who was talking and say the person's name out loud. In other traditions, hiccups were signs of growth, especially in children. Hiccuping, growing, was a reassuring explanation for worried parents. There was also the belief that hiccups indicated that you had eaten too much or too quickly, and that your body was complaining. This, curiously, has some physiological basis. Eating quickly can, in fact, irritate the diaphragm and cause hiccups. But the most fascinating are the numerous superstitious remedies for curing hiccups, each with its own peculiar logic. Drinking water upside down. The idea was that inverting the body would confuse the hiccups and make them stop. Getting a fright, the sudden shock would reset the nervous system. Holding your breath while counting to 10 or 20 or 30, depending on the tradition, this actually has some physiological effectiveness, as it increases CO2 in the blood and can relax the diaphragm. Putting sugar on your tongue, the sweetness would distract the body from the hiccup. Pulling your tongue, the physical stimulation of the vagus nerve could interrupt the reflex. Reciting a specific incantation or prayer, verbal protection against the spirit of the hiccup. What is fascinating is that many of these remedies, although based on superstition, occasionally work. Not because there's magic involved, but because they alter breathing patterns, stimulate specific nerves, or simply distract the brain enough to interrupt the reflex cycle. It's a perfect example of how superstitions can persist because they seem to work even though the explanation behind them is completely wrong. And this leads us to an entire category of superstitions, those related to the body and its involuntary manifestations. Itching, for example. Itching in the palm of your right hand, money is coming. Itching in the palm of your left hand, money is going out. Itching on your nose. Someone is coming to visit or you're going to fight with someone, depending on the tradition. Itching on your right ear. Someone is speaking well of you. Left ear. Speaking badly. These superstitions are attempts to give meaning to random bodily sensations. The human body itches for numerous reasons: dry skin, minor irritations, mild allergic reactions, healing processes. But for people who didn't understand dermatology or neurology, these sensations seemed like messages, signals, omens. And here's the psychological trick. If you believe that itching in your right hand means money is coming, you'll pay attention when money arrives after an itch. And you'll forget all the times your hand itched and nothing happened. It's confirmation bias in action again. But there is one bodily superstition that is particularly universal and curious: hot or red ears. In many cultures, when your ears suddenly become hot or red, it means someone is talking about you. To find out who, you should think of specific people. When you think of the right person, your ears cool down. Physiologically, ears become red and hot due to increased blood flow, which can be caused by ambient temperature, emotions, embarrassment, anger, excitement, physical exercise, or simply normal variations in circulation. It has nothing to do with people talking about you. But the superstition persists because it offers a narrative explanation for a physical sensation. Instead of my circulation is varying, we have someone is thinking about me, which is much more interesting and emotionally significant. All these bodily superstitions, sneezes, yawns, hiccups, itches, hot ears, have something in common. They transform involuntary physical experiences into meaningful narratives. They tell us that our bodies are not just biological machines, but spiritual antennas, receivers of messages, connected to a larger network of meaning. It's comforting, in a way. It's lonely to think that we're just isolated organisms responding mechanically to stimuli. It's much more welcoming to believe that when we sneeze, someone cares enough to bless us. That when our ears burn, someone is thinking of us. that our bodies are constantly in communication with the world around us, even though we rationally know that's not how it works. And perhaps that's exactly why these superstitions persist. Not because they're true in the literal sense, but because they're true in the emotional sense. They connect us to each other, create shared rituals, transform mundane moments into opportunities for care and attention. Saying bless you when someone sneezes doesn't protect the person's soul, but it expresses care. It creates a moment of mutual recognition. It reinforces social bonds, and perhaps in the end, that's what all superstitions really do. They don't change the physical world, but they change the social and emotional world in which we live. But there are superstitions that go beyond the individual body and extend to the world around us, especially to the spaces we inhabit. Our homes, our dwellings, the places where we sleep and eat and live. And there are fascinating beliefs about how to protect these spaces, how to attract luck into them, and how to prevent bad luck from entering. Some of these practices are so old that their origins are lost in the mist of time, but their echoes still resonate in doors, windows, and thresholds around the world. Your home is your refuge, the place where you feel safe, protected from the outside world. But have you ever stopped to think about how many superstitions specifically surround the entrance to your home, the door, the threshold, the boundary between the public world and your private space? Doors are much more than physical barriers. In practically all human cultures, they are seen as portals, magical frontiers, points of transition between two worlds, and as such, they need to be protected, respected, treated with ritual care. Let's start with one of the best-known superstitions. Not sweeping dirt out the door. Have you heard this? When cleaning the house, you should sweep the dirt towards the center of the room and then collect it. Never sweep it directly out the door. Why? Because sweeping dirt out the door is sweeping luck out of the house. The origin of this belief is fascinatingly practical. In ancient times, before ceramic tiles or polished wood floors, many houses had dirt floors. Sweeping vigorously towards the door created dust that spread, dirtying the threshold and the outside area, precisely where visitors would step before entering. Furthermore, small valuable objects, coins, buttons, small tools, could be accidentally swept out and lost. Sweeping luck out was literally sweeping valuable things to where you couldn't retrieve them. But there is also a deep, symbolic layer. The door is the boundary between inside and outside, between safety and danger, between the known and the unknown. Everything you do at this boundary has amplified meaning. Sweeping out is a gesture of expulsion, of rejection. If you sweep towards the door, you are symbolically expelling not just dirt, but everything inside, but including luck, prosperity, blessings. Sweeping inwards towards the center is a gesture of gathering, of keeping, of preserving. It's bringing things close, not pushing them away. This same logic applies to other door-related superstitions. For example, never leave shoes upside down near the door. Why? Because inverted shoes symbolize death, bad luck, the world turned upside down. Placing inverted shoes at the entrance is inviting chaos into your home. Or this one, never leave the back door and the front door open at the same time. The belief is that this creates a corridor through which luck can enter through the front and immediately exit through the back without remaining in the house. It's a vivid image. Luck as a draft, flowing through the house without settling. There are also superstitions about who should be the first person to enter a new home. In many cultures, it should be the man of the family, carrying bread and salt, symbols of sustenance and preservation. In others, it should be a child, symbolizing new beginnings and the future. In some traditions, a cat should enter first, to cleanse negative energies. And there's the practice of warming the house. A housewarming party is not just a social celebration, but a ritual of protection. Filling the house with people, laughter, food, music is a way to bless it, to fill it with positive energy from the start. But the most protected part of the entrance is not the door itself, it's the threshold. The threshold, that piece of wood, stone, or metal at the base of the door, is considered the most vulnerable and most sacred point of the house. It is literally the line between inside and outside, the place where two worlds meet. In ancient Rome, there was a specific goddess for thresholds, Cardia, protector of hinges and portals. There were elaborate rituals to consecrate thresholds of new homes, including sacrifices and prayers. In Jewish tradition, the mezuzah, a small parchment containing verses from the Torah placed on the doorpost, serves as spiritual protection for all who enter and exit. Touching the mezuzah when passing is a gesture of recognition of this protection. In many European cultures, burying protective objects under the threshold was common practice. Horseshoes, coins, salt, specific herbs, even small religious figures. These objects served as invisible guardians, preventing evil from entering the house. There is also the superstition of never stepping on the threshold when entering or exiting. In some cultures, it is believed that spirits live on the threshold, and stepping on it is disrespectful or dangerous. In others, the threshold is seen as an in-between space, neither inside nor outside, and remaining in this liminal space is to be trapped between worlds, vulnerable. This belief has a curious manifestation, the tradition of carrying the bride over the threshold. There are multiple explanations for this. One is that the bride, being new to the house, does not know the spirits of the threshold and could accidentally offend them. Carrying her protects both her and the spirits. Another explanation is that stumbling on the threshold when entering for the first time would be a terrible omen for the marriage, so carrying the bride eliminates this risk. But there is also a darker explanation, rooted in ancient practices. In some cultures, it was believed that brides were particularly vulnerable to evil spirits on their wedding day. Not allowing their feet to touch the threshold was a form of protection against possession or the evil eye. Today, carrying the bride over the threshold is seen as romantic, traditional, a gesture of chivalry. Few couples know they are performing a millennia-old spiritual protection ritual. And it's not just doors that carry superstitions. Windows do too. Windows are the eyes of the house, openings to the outside world. And as such, they need to be treated with care. In many cultures, there are superstitions about what you should or shouldn't do near windows. For example, never sleep with your feet pointing directly towards a window. The belief is that your soul, wandering during sleep, a common belief in many cultures, could leave through the window and not be able to return, or that spirits could enter through the window and pull your soul out. Or this one, never place a mirror directly in front of a window. The explanation varies. Some say it reflects luck back out of the house, others that it creates a portal for spirits, still others that it confuses the energy of the house. There are also superstitions about opening windows at specific times. In some European traditions, when someone died at home, all windows were immediately opened to allow the soul to escape. Keeping the windows closed trapped the soul in the house, preventing it from moving on to the afterlife. On the other hand, during storms, especially thunderstorms, windows should be closed to prevent lightning or evil spirits from entering. There was a belief that thunder was battles between celestial forces, and keeping windows open was inviting these forces into the house. And there's the practice of placing specific plants in windows, not just for aesthetics, but for protection. Rosemary, rue, snake plant. Each culture has its specific protective plants that, when placed in windows, supposedly ward off the evil eye, envy, and negative energies. Interestingly, some of these plants actually have properties that justify their placement in windows. Rosemary repels some insects, snake plant purifies the air. The protection has practical bases even if the original explanation was spiritual. But it's not just entrances and openings that carry superstitions. The rooms of the house themselves have their rules. The kitchen, for example, is considered the heart of the home in many cultures. And there are specific superstitions about how to keep it lucky. Never place shoes on the kitchen table. This superstition is particularly strong in mining cultures, such as in northern England. Why? Because when a miner died in an accident, his shoes were often placed on the table as part of the mourning ritual. Shoes on the table became associated with death. Furthermore, there's an obvious hygienic logic. Shoes carry dirt from the streets, and placing them where you prepare food is unsanitary. The superstition reinforced an important hygiene practice. Another, never leave knives crossed on the table or counter. Crossed knives symbolize conflict, quarrels, cutting ties. It's an omen of family arguments. The solution? Always place knives parallel or separated. There are also superstitions about salt in the kitchen. Besides not spilling it, there's the belief that lending salt to a neighbor brings bad luck, unless the neighbor returns a different amount, not exactly the same. The logic is that salt, being so valuable, creates a spiritual debt that needs to be broken by the difference in the return. And there's the belief that if you accidentally add too much salt to food, it means you're in love. It's a curious superstition, possibly originating from the observation that distracted people, perhaps thinking about someone special, make mistakes in the kitchen. The bedroom, in turn, has its own superstitions, many related to sleep and dreams. Never sleep with a mirror reflecting your bed. The belief is that mirrors can capture souls during sleep, or that you might wake up and be startled by your own reflection, causing spiritual problems. In some cultures, mirrors in bedrooms are covered at night for this reason. Never place the bed directly aligned with the door. This is called the coffin position in some traditions, because it's how bodies are placed before a funeral. It is believed that sleeping in this position drains vital energy. And there are superstitions about what to do upon waking. Never get out of bed with your left foot first. Hence the expression, waking up on the wrong side of the bed, meaning starting the day in a bad mood or with bad luck. Always get out with your right foot first to ensure a lucky day. These superstitions about the house, doors, windows, rooms, all share a common theme. The house is not just a physical structure, but a spiritual space that needs to be protected, respected, kept in harmony. And there's a deep psychological logic to this. Our home is where we are most vulnerable, where we sleep, where we let down our guard, where we raise our families. Having rituals and beliefs that protect this space makes us feel safer, more in control. Even if we rationally know that sweeping in a specific direction doesn't affect our luck, the act of being intentional about how we care for our space has psychological value. It creates mindfulness, attention, care. And perhaps that's what all these domestic superstitions really do. They transform mundane tasks, sweeping, tidying, entering and exiting, into acts of meaning. They tell us that every gesture matters, that every action has weight, that we are active participants in creating our own well-being. It's a form of empowerment, even if it's illusory. But there are superstitions that go beyond the individual home and extend to the community, to the shared world. Superstitions about weather, about climate, about the seasons. And some of these beliefs have shaped agricultural practices, cultural calendars, and even political decisions throughout history. Like, for example, the deeply ingrained beliefs about what the moon can or cannot do. Look at the night sky. If the moon is visible, you are looking at one of the celestial objects that has most influenced human imagination, beliefs and superstitions throughout all of history. The moon has been worshipped as a goddess, feared as an omen, consulted as a guide, and blamed for everything from human behavior to plant growth. But what is it about the moon that captures so much of our attention? And which of these ancient beliefs have any basis in reality? Let's start with the most famous one. The full moon and its supposed effect on human behavior. It must be a full moon. Have you heard or said this when things seem particularly chaotic? When traffic is more aggressive, when the emergency room is fuller, when people seem more irritated, more impulsive, more crazy. The word lunatic comes directly from lunar. The belief that the moon, especially the full moon, can cause temporary or permanent insanity. This belief is as old as recorded civilization. In ancient Greece and Rome, it was believed that sleeping under the light of a full moon could cause madness. The moon was associated with goddesses like Selene and Diana, powerful and capricious, capable of influencing human minds. Philosophers like Aristotle and Pliny the Elder wrote about the effects of the moon on the human brain, theorizing that just as the moon affects the tides, it should affect fluids in the human body, including the brain. In the Middle Ages, this belief intensified. Full moon was associated with transformations. Werewolves, vampires, witches performing rituals. It was the time when the boundary between the natural world and the supernatural became thinner, more permeable. Historical psychiatric hospitals reported, and some staff still report today, that patients become more agitated during the full moon. Police departments frequently attribute increases in emergency calls to lunar phases. Delivery rooms supposedly become busier. Surgeons report more complications. But here's the fascinating part. Rigorous scientific studies repeated over decades have found no significant statistical correlation between lunar phases and human behavior, crime rates, hospital admissions, or births. So why does the belief persist so strongly? The answer lies in confirmation bias and selective memory. When something unusual happens during a full moon, a particularly hectic night at work, a strange accident, bizarre behavior, we remember it and attribute it to the moon. When the same things happen during other lunar phases, we don't make the connection. Our brain seeks patterns, and the full moon, being visible and striking, becomes an easy target for causal attribution. There's also the effect of expectation. If you believe that a full moon causes chaos, you might unconsciously pay more attention to chaotic events during that period, or even behave in a more tense or anxious way, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. But not all beliefs about the moon are unfounded. The moon really does have measurable effects on the natural world, just not in the way superstitions suggest. The moon controls the tides through gravitational force. This is established scientific fact. Oceans, seas, large bodies of water respond visibly to the moon's position. High and low tides follow predictable lunar cycles. Some marine animals synchronize their reproductive cycles with lunar tides. Corals, for example, release eggs and sperm simultaneously during specific full moons, creating mass spawning events. Sea turtles often lay eggs during full moons, when high tides facilitate access to beaches. And there is growing evidence that some terrestrial animals also respond to lunar cycles, not because the moon affects them directly, but because moonlight affects predator and prey behavior, creating evolutionary pressures. So the moon has real effects. Just not the mystical effects that superstitions attribute to it. But there is a category of lunar beliefs that is particularly persistent and culturally significant: the moon and agriculture. Plant during the waxing moon, harvest during the waning moon. Have you heard this? It's one of the most widespread agricultural superstitions in the world, practiced by farmers on every continent. The traditional logic is this. During the waxing moon, when the moon is growing from new to full, sap in plants rises, making them more vigorous. It's the ideal time to plant crops that grow above ground: tomatoes, corn, beans, flowers. During the waning moon, when the moon is shrinking from full to new, sap descends to the roots. It's the ideal time to plant root crops: potatoes, carrots, onions, and to prune, because plants bleed less. This belief is as old as organized agriculture. Agricultural lunar calendars have existed for thousands of years, in cultures from ancient China to the Maya, from Egyptians to Celts. But does it work? The scientific answer is there is no consistent evidence that lunar phases affect plant growth in any measurable way. Controlled studies find no significant differences between plants cultivated according to lunar phases and plants cultivated without lunar consideration. So why does the practice persist, especially among experienced farmers who rely on practical results? There are some possible explanations. First, lunar calendars are easy to follow. Before printed or digital calendars, the moon was the most reliable clock in the sky. Using lunar phases to schedule planting ensured that you planted at regular intervals, which by itself improves results. Not because of the moon, but because of consistency. Second, the full moon provides extra light at night. Farmers who planted or harvested during the full moon could work more hours, taking advantage of natural light. The success of planting during the full moon was, in fact, the result of more time and attention dedicated, not the lunar phase itself. Third, in some regions, lunar phases correlate with seasonal climate patterns, not because the moon causes the climate, but because both follow predictable cycles. Planting according to the moon could, coincidentally, align with ideal climate conditions. But there is one aspect of lunar agriculture that has real basis. Moonlight affects some insect behaviors. Certain pests are more active during full moons, others during new moons. Farmers who observed these patterns over generations may have developed practices that coincidentally avoided periods of high pest activity, not because they understood entomology, but because the moon said to do it this way. It's a fascinating example of how superstitious practices can occasionally produce positive results for completely different reasons than the practitioners believe. Are you discovering layers of history you never imagined existed behind everyday beliefs? If so, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next fascinating stories we have prepared, and share in the comments. Have you ever planted or done something following the lunar phases, but the moon is not the only celestial body surrounded by superstitions? The sun, the stars, the planets all have their roles in ancient and modern beliefs. Eclipses, for example, have been a source of terror and fascination throughout human history. Imagine you lived 3,000 years ago. You've never heard of astronomy, of orbits, of planetary shadows. All you know is that the sun, the source of all light, heat, and life, suddenly begins to disappear in the middle of the day. The sky darkens, stars appear, animals become confused, the temperature drops. It's terrifying. Cultures around the world developed myths to explain eclipses. In Norse mythology, a giant wolf called Skull pursued the sun, and during an eclipse it managed to reach it and bite it. Only by making noise, indeed beating drums, shouting, could people scare the wolf away and save the sun. In ancient China, it was believed that a celestial dragon was devouring the sun. Elaborate rituals were performed to save the sun, including beating drums, firing arrows at the sky, and making offerings. In many cultures, eclipses were seen as omens of disaster: death of kings, imminent wars, famine, plagues. Rulers consulted astrologers and priests to interpret the specific meaning of each eclipse. And here's something fascinating. In some cultures, astronomers learned to predict eclipses with impressive accuracy, millennia before modern science. The Maya, for example, had calendars that predicted eclipses with precision. But even knowing when they would happen, they still treated them as supernatural events requiring rituals. Knowledge and superstition coexisted. They were not mutually exclusive. Today, we know exactly what eclipses are, predictable alignments of celestial bodies. We can calculate when and where they will occur centuries in advance. And yet there is something primordially impressive about seeing the sun disappear in the middle of the day. Even with all our knowledge, eclipses still fill us with awe, not terror, but awe. Perhaps that's what connects ancient superstitions to modern experiences, the recognition that the universe is vast, powerful, and, at certain moments, overwhelmingly impressive. There are also superstitions related to shooting stars, meteors burning in the atmosphere. Make a wish when you see a shooting star, and it will come true. This belief is almost universal, found in cultures from every continent. Why? Because shooting stars are rare, brief, unexpected. Seeing one seems special, as if the universe were offering a unique moment of connection. It's an opportunity that cannot be planned, only seized when it arises. There's also the ancient association between sky and divinity. In many cultures, the heavens were the home of the gods. A star falling was seen as a divine messenger, a temporary opening between the human world and the divine. Making a wish at that moment was sending a message directly to the gods. Scientifically, shooting stars have no power to fulfill wishes, but psychologically, the ritual has value. Making a wish forces you to articulate a desire, to make it conscious, and the act of making the wish can motivate you subconsciously to work toward that goal. It's the same principle behind blowing out birthday candles and making a wish, or throwing a coin in a fountain. The ritual has no magical power, but it has psychological power, and there are superstitions about weather, not just meteorological observations, but beliefs about what causes or predicts climate changes. Red sky at night, sailor's delight. Red sky in morning, sailor take warning. This saying is thousands of years old and, curiously, has real scientific basis. Red sky at sunset indicates that the air to the west, where weather systems usually come from in mid-latitudes, is dry and clear, allowing the sun's red light to scatter. This usually means good weather coming. Red sky at dawn indicates that the dry air has already passed and moist systems are coming from the west, bringing possible storms. It's observational meteorology, transmitted through generations in the form of an easy-to-remember rhyme. But not all weather beliefs have real basis. Thunder in February means frost in May. There's no scientific correlation. If cows are lying down, it will rain. Cows lie down for many reasons, not because they predict rain. These beliefs persist because occasionally, by pure coincidence, they seem to work. And when they work, they reinforce the belief. When they don't work, we forget. It's the same psychological mechanism that keeps so many superstitions alive: selective memory and confirmation bias. But there is a category of weather superstitions that is particularly interesting: rituals to cause or stop rain. In practically all agricultural cultures throughout history, there are rain rituals, dances, chants, sacrifices, prayers, intended to bring rain during droughts or stop rain during floods. These rituals obviously don't control the climate, but they serve important social and psychological functions. During a devastating drought, when crops are dying and famine threatens, doing something, anything, is psychologically preferable to feeling helpless. Rain rituals give the community a sense of agency, of control, of hope. And when eventually it rains, because droughts always end eventually, the ritual is credited. The success is remembered. The many times the ritual failed are forgotten or rationalized. We didn't do it correctly. The gods were testing our faith. It's a perfect example of how superstitions can persist indefinitely because they're structured so that they can never be definitively refuted. But perhaps the most widespread weather superstition in modern times is about Groundhog Day, celebrated in the United States and Canada. According to tradition, if a groundhog emerges from its burrow on February 2nd and sees its shadow, indicating a sunny day, there will be 6 more weeks of winter. If it doesn't see its shadow, cloudy day, spring will arrive early. It's a charming superstition transformed into a media event, especially in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, where thousands of people gather annually to see Groundhog Phil make his prediction. The origin traces back to European traditions, especially German ones, where badgers or hedgehogs were used to predict weather. German immigrants brought the tradition to America and adapted it using groundhogs, which were abundant. The groundhog's accuracy, statistically no better than flipping a coin, but the tradition persists because it's fun, communal, a way of marking the transition between winter and spring. And perhaps that's what many weather and celestial superstitions really do. They mark time, create shared rituals, connect communities through common practices. They transform the impersonal passage of time into meaningful human narratives. The moon doesn't control our behavior, but observing its phases connects us to larger natural cycles. Shooting stars don't fulfill wishes, but they make us pause and reflect on what we desire. Weather rituals don't bring rain, but they unite us in shared hope. Superstitions about the sky and climate are, fundamentally, about our relationship with forces greater than ourselves, forces we cannot control, but to which we respond, which we observe, which we try to understand and, in some way, influence. And even in our scientific era, when we understand astronomy and meteorology, there is still something profoundly human about looking at the sky and feeling awe, mystery, connection. But not all superstitions look upward at the sky. Some look downward at the earth, at the objects we carry, at the symbols we wear on our bodies. And there is an entire category of superstitions related to jewelry, amulets, and personal objects that supposedly carry power. Power to protect, to bring luck, to ward off evil. And some of these beliefs have shaped entire industries, from the mining of precious stones to modern jewelry design. Look at what you're wearing right now. Is there any jewelry? A ring, a necklace, a bracelet? Perhaps something you wear every day? Something that feels wrong not to wear? Something that carries meaning beyond its appearance? Humans have adorned their bodies with objects since the dawn of civilization. And from the beginning, these objects were more than decoration. They were protection, power, identity, magic. The distinction between amulet and talisman is subtle but important. An amulet protects against evil. It wards off danger, disease, the evil eye. A talisman attracts good and it brings luck, prosperity, love. But in practice, most magical objects serve both functions, and the terms are often used interchangeably. Let's start with one of the oldest and most universal amulets, the eye. The Greek eye, or nazar, the blue and white eye-shaped amulet, is omnipresent in Mediterranean countries, the Middle East, and increasingly around the world. You see it in jewelry, on doors, on cars, on baby bracelets. Its function? To protect against the evil eye, by the belief that intense envy or admiration from another person can cause bad luck, illness, or misfortune. The belief in the evil eye is one of the oldest and most widespread superstitions of humanity. References to it appear in Sumerian texts from 5,000 years ago, in Greek and Roman writings, in the Bible, in the Quran, in practically all Mediterranean cultures, the Middle East, North Africa, and many others around the world. The logic is this: when someone looks at you or something of yours with intense envy, your house, your child, your success, That gaze carries negative energy that can cause real harm. It's not necessarily intentional. The envious person may not realize they're casting the evil eye, but the effect is the same. Children, especially babies, are considered particularly vulnerable. They are innocent, pure, often praised for their beauty or health, and all that praise, all that attention can attract the evil eye. That's why in many cultures, babies wear eye amulets from birth. But why does an eye protect against the evil eye? The logic is fascinatingly symmetrical. An eye that watches you reflects the envious gaze of whoever cast it back to them. It's a spiritual mirror. The evil eye sees itself and is neutralized. There's also a psychological layer. Wearing a visible eye amulet signals to others that you're protected, that you're aware of the possibility of envy, that you've taken precautions. This can, subconsciously, make people think twice before openly expressing envy. And there's a powerful placebo effect. If you believe you're protected, you feel more confident, less anxious. This confidence can by itself improve your luck. Not because the amulet has magical power, but because you act differently when you feel protected. But the eye is not the only universal amulet. There is another, even older, the hand. The hand of Fatima, Hamsa in Islam, the hand of Miriam in Judaism, the hand of Tanit in Phoenician cultures. All are variations of the same symbol, a stylized hand, often with an eye in the center of the palm. The hand as a symbol of protection makes intuitive sense. Hands are tools of action, of defense, of creation. A raised hand is a universal gesture of stop. An open hand shows you're not armed, that you come in peace, but also that you're ready to defend yourself. The hand amulet combines this symbolic physical protection with spiritual protection, and when it includes an eye in the center, it combines two of the most powerful amulets into a single symbol. These amulets have been used for millennia. Archaeologists have found ancient versions in Mesopotamia, Egypt, Carthage, and today you find them in jewelry stores in shopping centers, worn by people who may not know their origins, but feel an intuitive connection to the symbol. There are also amulets based on specific materials, not just shapes. And one of the most valued historically is red coral. Red coral has been used as a protective amulet, especially for children, in Mediterranean cultures for thousands of years. In Italy, the cornicello, a small horn of red coral, is worn to protect against the evil eye. In ancient Greece, coral was hung in baby cribs. Why coral? First, its color. Red is the color of blood, of life, of vitality. In many cultures, red is considered protective, capable of warding off evil spirits. Second, coral comes from the sea, a mysterious, powerful realm associated with deities in many mythologies. Third, coral is rare and valuable, making it a symbol of status beyond protection. There was also the belief that coral changed color in the presence of danger or illness, serving as an early warning system. This has a real basis. Organic coral can fade or change tone with exposure to certain chemicals or pH changes, but not in a way that can actually detect danger. Today, red coral is protected in many places due to overfishing and reef damage. But the tradition persists, with many people wearing synthetic coral or other red stones as substitutes. And this leads us to an entire category of superstitions, precious stones, and their supposed properties. The idea that different stones have different powers is ancient and universal. Medieval lapidaries, books that catalogued properties of stones, attributed specific powers to each gem. Diamonds brought courage, rubies protected against poison, emeralds improved vision, sapphires brought wisdom. Many of these beliefs persist today, transformed in the modern healing crystals industry. Rose quartz for love, amethyst for mental clarity, black tourmaline for protection. Each stone has its attributed properties. Is there any real basis? Scientifically, no. Stones don't emit measurable healing energies. Controlled studies find no effects beyond placebo. But the placebo effect is real and powerful. If you believe a stone helps you, you can actually feel better. Not because the stone does something, but because your belief activates real psychological and physiological processes. Placebo can reduce pain, anxiety, stress. It can improve mood and even immune function. So do stones work? Not in the way believers claim, but they can have real effects through psychological mechanisms. There's also the aesthetic and tactile question. Holding a smooth, beautiful stone can be calming. It's meditative. It can serve as an anchor of attention, a mindfulness tool. The benefit doesn't come from the stone itself, but from the practice of pausing, breathing, focusing. But there is a type of jewelry that carries particularly strong and sometimes dark superstitions. Rings. Rings are circles, without beginning, without end, symbols of eternity. That's why they're worn in weddings, representing eternal love. But there are specific superstitions about how to wear rings and what they mean. Never wear an engagement or wedding ring before you're actually engaged or married. The belief is that this jinxes the future relationship, that you're skipping steps, and the universe will correct this by preventing the marriage from happening. Never let someone else try on your wedding ring. This is seen as allowing another person to enter your marriage, creating an opening for infidelity or divorce. If a wedding ring breaks or is lost, it's a terrible omen for the marriage. In some cultures, it's seen as a sign that the marriage will end. In others, it's a warning to pay more attention to the relationship. These superstitions reflect the deep, symbolic importance we attach to wedding rings. They're not just jewelry, they're physical symbols of emotional and legal commitments. Treating them carelessly seems symbolically to treat the marriage carelessly. There are also superstitions about which finger to wear rings on. The left ring finger is traditionally the wedding finger in many Western cultures, based on the ancient Roman belief that a special vein, the vena amoris, or vein of love, ran directly from that finger to the heart. Anatomically, this isn't true. All fingers have veins that eventually lead to the heart, but the belief was powerful enough to establish a tradition that persists to this day. In some cultures, different fingers have different meanings. A ring on the thumb can signify willpower. A ring on the index finger can signify authority. A ring on the middle finger can signify responsibility. A ring on the pinky can signify communication or creativity. These attributions vary culturally and have no scientific basis, but they create a symbolic language that people use to express identity and intention. And there's a particularly interesting superstition about pearls. Never wear pearls at your wedding because pearls represent tears. This belief is especially strong in some Asian and European cultures. The logic is that pearls, being formed inside oysters in response to irritation, a grain of sand, symbolize suffering transformed into beauty. But still, suffering. Wearing pearls at a wedding is inviting tears into the relationship. On the other hand, in some cultures, pearls are viewed positively as symbols of purity, wisdom acquired through experience, beauty born from adversity. The same jewel, opposite interpretations. This illustrates something fundamental about superstitions. They're not universal or objective. They're cultural constructions, and the same object can have radically different meanings in different contexts. But there are personal objects beyond jewelry that carry superstitions. Clothes. Wearing clothes inside out, for example. If you accidentally put on a shirt inside out, there are two opposite interpretations depending on the culture. In some, it's bad luck and you should take it off immediately and wear it correctly. In others, it's good luck, a sign that something unexpectedly good will happen, and you should leave it inside out all day to not break the luck. There are also superstitions about new clothes. In many cultures, you should never wear completely new clothes to an important event without breaking them in first, wearing them at least once before. The idea is that new clothes are untested and might bring unexpected discomfort or bad luck. And there's the superstition about wearing green at weddings. In some European cultures, green is considered bad luck for brides because it's the color of fairies. And fairies are notoriously jealous of human brides and can cause trouble. In other cultures, green is perfectly acceptable or even auspicious. These superstitions about clothes reflect the importance we give to appearance and presentation. Clothes are not just functional coverings, they're expressions of identity, status, intention. Having rituals and beliefs about them is a way of acknowledging this significance. There are also personal objects that become talismans not through cultural tradition, but through personal association. A pen with which you passed an important exam, a shirt you were wearing when your team won a championship, a pair of lucky socks. These objects have no inherent magical power, but they carry memories, associations, emotional meaning. Using them creates a sense of continuity, of connection with past successes, of confidence. Athletes are particularly known for luck rituals and objects. Michael Jordan wore his college shorts under his NBA uniform. Serena Williams wears the same socks during a tournament as long as she's winning. Baseball players have elaborate rituals before batting. Do these rituals work? Not magically, but psychologically, yes. They create consistency, reduce anxiety, establish a familiar mental state. In high-level sports, where the difference between victory and defeat can be millimetric, any psychological advantage matters. And perhaps that's what all amulets, talismans, and lucky objects really do. They don't change the external world, but they change our internal world. They make us feel more confident, more protected, more connected to something greater. It's a form of emotional self-regulation. And if it works, if it makes you feel better, more capable, more hopeful, then it has value, regardless of whether it has real magical power. But there is a category of superstitions that doesn't involve objects we carry, but rather actions we avoid, taboos, prohibitions, things that should not be done. And some of these taboos are so specific, so peculiar, that their origins are fascinating historical puzzles, like, for example, the strange and persistent belief about scissors left open on tables, or about giving knives as gifts, or about the number of flowers in a bouquet. You are choosing a gift for someone special, perhaps a birthday, a wedding, a celebration. You want it to be perfect, meaningful, memorable, but there are invisible rules, ancient superstitions about what you should and shouldn't give. And breaking these rules, according to belief, can sour relationships, bring bad luck, or even cut bonds of friendship. Let's start with one of the most widespread superstitions. Never give knives or scissors as gifts. The logic is direct and symbolic. Cutting objects cut relationships. Giving a knife or scissors to someone is, symbolically, cutting your friendship or love. It's an omen of separation, conflict, rupture. This belief is particularly strong in Italian, Chinese, Scandinavian, and many other cultures. In some traditions, there's an ingenious solution. If you really need to give a knife, perhaps a high-quality kitchen knife set, the person who receives it must give a coin in return, even if it's just a penny. This transforms the gift into a purchase, breaking the symbolic curse. The coin doesn't need to be valuable. The symbolic act is what matters. You're not giving the knife. You're selling it for a nominal price. And purchases don't carry the same symbolic weight as gifts. There's practical logic behind this superstition too. Knives are dangerous. Giving a knife to someone is literally giving them a weapon. In times and places where disputes could quickly turn violent, there was real wisdom in avoiding giving objects that could be used in conflicts. Furthermore, quality knives were valuable. giving an expensive knife created a significant social debt. If the relationship soured afterward, the knife could become a bitter reminder, a physical symbol of lost friendship. Better to avoid it altogether. But knives are not the only taboo gifts. There are others, each with its own peculiar logic. Never give clocks, especially in Chinese culture. Why? Because giving a clock in Mandarin, songjong, songjong, sounds exactly like attending a funeral, songjong, songjong. It's a dark pun that transforms an apparently harmless gift into an omen of death. Clocks also symbolize time passing, time ending. Giving a clock can be interpreted as wishing the person's time to end. Again, an omen of death. This superstition is so strong that many stores in China avoid selling clocks as gifts or offer the same solution as knives. The person who receives it gives a coin in return, transforming the gift into a purchase. Interestingly, this superstition is not universal. In Western cultures, clocks are common and appreciated gifts, especially for retirements or graduations, moments of temporal transition. The same object, completely different cultural meanings. There are also superstitions about shoes. In many Asian cultures, never give shoes to your romantic partner. Why? Because shoes allow the person to walk away from you. It's an omen that the relationship will end, that the person will leave you. The symbolic logic is clear. Shoes, pashik's movement, departure. Giving shoes is, symbolically, facilitating the person's exit from your life. There's an exception. Shoes for babies or small children are generally acceptable because they symbolize growth and development, not departure. And there are superstitions about umbrellas. In Chinese culture, never give an umbrella as a gift. Why? Another linguistic pun, umbrella, san, sounds similar to separate, san. Giving an umbrella is, linguistically and symbolically, wishing for separation. These superstitions based on linguistic puns are particularly fascinating because they're completely language-specific. They don't make sense in translation. An English speaker giving an umbrella isn't making a pun about separation, but a Mandarin speaker is, even if unconsciously. This illustrates how superstitions are deeply rooted in specific cultural and linguistic contexts. They're not universal. They're products of specific shared histories, languages, and experiences. But there are superstitions about gifts that transcend specific cultures. For example, the number of flowers in a bouquet. In many European and Slavic cultures, you should never give an even number of flowers, only odd numbers. Why? Because even numbers of flowers are for funerals, for the dead. Odd numbers are for the living, for celebrations. The logic varies depending on the tradition. In some, even numbers are seen as complete and therefore finished, associated with the end of life. Odd numbers are incomplete, growing, associated with continuing life. In other traditions, the explanation is more practical. At funerals, flowers were often divided equally between two sides of a coffin or grave, resulting in even numbers. Odd numbers couldn't be divided equally, so they were used for other occasions. But this superstition is not universal. In many Asian and Western cultures, even numbers are perfectly acceptable, or even preferred. 12 red roses is a classic, romantic gift in many parts of the world, but would be inappropriate in contexts where even numbers are taboo. Are you discovering invisible rules that shape behaviors without us noticing? If these stories are opening your eyes to hidden layers of culture, share this video with someone who would also love these revelations. And in the comments, tell us, have you ever given or received a gift that, without knowing it, broke a superstition? There are also superstitions about the colors of gifts. In many Asian cultures, avoid wrapping gifts in white or black paper, colors associated with mourning and death. Use red, gold, pink, colors of celebration and luck. In some Western cultures, there are superstitions about giving yellow roses which can symbolize jealousy or declining friendship rather than love. Red roses are romantic love, white ones are purity or new beginnings, yellow ones are complicated. These associations of colors with specific meanings are called the language of flowers or floriography, which was especially elaborate in the Victorian era. Each flower, each color, each combination had a coded meaning. Giving flowers was sending complex messages. Today, most people don't know these detailed codes, but echoes persist. Red roses still mean love. White lilies are still associated with funerals in many cultures. And there's a particularly curious superstition about pearls, which we've already mentioned, in relation to weddings, but which extends to gifts. Never give pearls as a gift because they represent tears and sadness. This belief is strong enough that some people refuse pearls as gifts or insist on the coin solution, giving something in return to transform the gift into a transaction. But again, this varies culturally. In some traditions, pearls are perfectly appropriate gifts, symbolizing wisdom, purity, and beauty born from adversity. There are also taboos about giving used or second-hand items. In some cultures, giving something used is seen as insulting, as if you're giving something you no longer want, something of lesser value. In other cultures, especially in modern sustainability contexts, vintage or antique items are valued gifts, carrying history and character, and there's the superstition about giving empty wallets or purses. In many cultures, if you give a wallet or purse, you must put at least a coin inside. Why? Because giving an empty money container symbolizes poverty, lack, absence of prosperity. Putting a coin inside activates the wallet, symbolizing that it will always have money. It's a small gesture, but symbolically powerful. It transforms the gift from an empty object into a symbol of abundance. These superstitions about gifts reflect something fundamental about the act of giving. Gifts are not just objects, they are communication. They express feelings, intentions, wishes, and because they carry so much symbolic weight, there are rules, written and unwritten, about how to do it correctly. Breaking these rules, even accidentally, can send unintended messages. And in cultures where superstitions are taken seriously, it can cause real offense, discomfort, or worry. But there's a fascinating aspect of these superstitions. They create opportunities for correction rituals. The coin given in exchange for a knife. The explanation that you didn't know the superstition. The gesture of rewrapping or adding something to the gift to neutralize the bad luck. These correction rituals acknowledge that intentions matter more than accidental actions. If you gave a knife without knowing the superstition, explaining and offering the coin solution shows that you care, that you respect the person's beliefs, that you want to keep the relationship harmonious. And perhaps that's what all these superstitions about gifts really do. They create a shared language of care and attention. They force us to think carefully about what we give, to consider not just material value, but symbolic meaning. In a world where gifts can be bought with a click, delivered without thought, these superstitions remind us that giving should be intentional, meaningful, conscious. But there are taboos that go beyond gifts. Actions you simply shouldn't do, regardless of context. And some of these taboos are so specific, so peculiar, that it's fascinating to discover their origins. For example, never open an umbrella inside a house. This superstition is widespread in many Western cultures. Why? The most common explanation traces back to the 18th century, when umbrellas with metal frames and springs began to be produced. These umbrellas were rigid, heavy, and potentially dangerous when opened. Opening one inside a house, in small spaces with low ceilings near other people, could easily cause accidents, hitting someone, knocking over objects, breaking light fixtures. The bad luck of opening umbrellas inside a house was, originally, the very real risk of domestic accidents. There's also a symbolic explanation. Umbrellas protect against rain, which comes from the sky. Opening one inside a house is symbolically insulting the ceiling, suggesting that your home doesn't offer adequate protection or offending household spirits that should be protecting you. But the practical explanation is probably more accurate. And even today, even with safer modern umbrellas, the superstition persists, transformed from a safety warning into a cultural taboo. There's also the taboo of putting hats on beds. This superstition is particularly strong in some Western cultures. Why? One explanation traces back to times when lice were common. Hats, being worn on the head, were often infested. Putting a hat on a bed could transfer lice to bedding, a serious hygiene problem. The bad luck was literally a parasite infestation. Another explanation is darker. At funerals, the hat of the deceased was often placed on the bed before burial. Hat on bed became associated with death. Both explanations, only practical and symbolic, to reinforce the same taboo. Hats don't belong on beds, and there's the taboo of singing at the table during meals. In some cultures, this is considered extremely rude or unlucky. Why? The practical explanation is that singing at the table is distraction, disrespect for the food, and table companions. Meals in many traditional cultures are sacred moments of family communion. Singing breaks the appropriate atmosphere. The superstitious explanation varies. In some traditions, singing at the table means you'll marry a fool, or that you'll cry before bed, or that you're inviting unwanted spirits to the meal, but the effect is the same, reinforcing norms of behavior at the table, teaching children to be respectful during meals. There are also taboos about whistling. In many maritime cultures, whistling aboard a ship is strictly forbidden. Why? Because whistling calls the wind, and excessive wind can cause dangerous storms. This superstition has practical logic. On ships, commands were often given through specific whistles. Casual whistling could be confused with a command, causing confusion and potentially danger. Furthermore, in loud ship environments, wind, waves, creaking ropes, whistling was an important form of communication. Whistling without purpose polluted this communication channel. The superstition reinforced a practical safety rule: don't whistle unless it's an official command. And there are taboos about sweeping at night. In many Asian cultures, sweeping after sunset is considered bad luck. Why? One explanation is that sweeping at night sweeps away the luck or wealth that arrived during the day. You should wait until morning to clean, allowing luck to settle during the night. Another explanation is more practical. In times before electric lighting, sweeping in the dark meant you could easily sweep and lose small valuable objects, coins, jewelry, small tools. Better to wait for daylight when you can clearly see what you're sweeping, and there's the belief that ancestral spirits visit homes at night. Sweeping could sweep these spirits out, showing disrespect. All these explanations, practical, economic, spiritual, converge on the same taboo: don't sweep at night. What's fascinating about all these taboos is how they often have multiple layers of meaning: practical, symbolic, spiritual. They're not just random superstitions, they're complex systems of cultural knowledge, transmitting practical wisdom through supernatural narratives. And they work. If you believe that opening umbrellas inside a house brings bad luck, you won't do it, and therefore will avoid domestic accidents. If you believe that sweeping at night sweeps away luck, you'll wait until morning, and won't lose small objects in the dark. The superstition achieves the desired result, even if the explanation is wrong from a scientific perspective. And perhaps that's why so many superstitions persist. Not because they're true in the literal sense, but because they're useful. They shape behavior in ways that often have real benefits: safety, hygiene, social respect, mindfulness. They're social technologies disguised as magical beliefs. But there's a final category of superstitions that deserves attention: those related not to objects or actions, but to words. Things you shouldn't say, names you shouldn't pronounce, topics you shouldn't mention. And some of these linguistic superstitions reveal deep fears about the power of words to shape reality. Words have power, not just metaphorical or poetic power, but real, tangible power, capable of changing relationships, starting wars, healing wounds, or opening new ones. And throughout human history, we have recognized this power through superstitions about what we should and shouldn't say. There are words that should not be pronounced, names that should not be spoken aloud, topics that should be avoided in certain contexts. And breaking these rules according to belief can invoke exactly what you're trying to avoid. Let's start with one of the most famous linguistic superstitions. Never say good luck to an actor before a performance. In theatre, saying good luck is considered extremely unlucky. Instead, you should say break a leg in English. It seems completely contradictory, but there's logic behind it. One explanation traces back to the superstition that wishing for something directly makes the universe do the opposite. If you say good luck, you're tempting fate, and fate will respond with bad luck. But if you say something negative, break a leg, the universe will do the opposite and guarantee success. It's a logic of reverse psychology applied to the cosmos. Another explanation is more practical and historical. In ancient theatre, actors who weren't on stage stood behind the side curtains, in the legs of the stage. Being called to the stage meant you were working, that you had a role. Breaking a leg, that is, passing through the side curtains onto the stage, meant you were performing, that you had work. Wishing someone to break a leg was wishing that they'd be so successful they'd be called to the stage repeatedly, perhaps even to take bows after the performance. There's also the tradition that after a successful performance, the audience applauded so much that actors took multiple bows. And bows involve bending the knees, breaking the legs symbolically. Regardless of the exact origin, the superstition is taken extremely seriously in the theatre world. Saying good luck can genuinely offend or worry superstitious actors. And theatre has many other linguistic superstitions. The most famous, never say Macbeth inside a theatre. Shakespeare's play is known as the Scottish play, or the play that must not be named. Why? There are several theories. One is that the play contains real spells and enchantments that Shakespeare copied from witchcraft practices, and pronouncing the name invokes these dark forces. Another is that the play is so popular that financially struggling theatres frequently stage it as a last resort. So Macbeth became associated with theatres going bankrupt. There's also the practical explanation. Macbeth involves many sword-fighting scenes. In poorly rehearsed productions, accidents are common. The play gained a reputation for being dangerous, and the superstition grew around it. If you accidentally say Macbeth inside a theatre, there's a correction ritual. You must leave the theatre, spin around 3 times, spit, curse, and then ask permission to re-enter. It's elaborate, humiliating, and designed to ensure you never make the mistake again. But it's not just in theatre that certain words are taboo. In many cultures, there are names that should not be pronounced. In some Jewish traditions, the name of God, the Tetragrammaton, YHWH, should not be pronounced in vain. It's so sacred that pronouncing it casually is blasphemy. Instead, substitutes are used: Adonai, Hashem, the name, GD, written without the vowel. The logic is that names have power. Knowing the true name of something gives power over it. The name of God is so powerful that it must be protected, used only in specific sacred contexts. This belief in the power of names is universal. In many indigenous cultures around the world, true names are kept secret. A person may have a public name and a secret name, known only to close family or spiritual leaders. Revealing the secret name would give others power over the person, power to curse, to control, to harm. There are also cultures where names of the dead should not be pronounced. In some Australian Aboriginal traditions, after someone dies, their name is not spoken for a period, sometimes years, sometimes permanently. The belief is that pronouncing the name can disturb the spirit, prevent it from resting, or even call it back, causing problems for the living. This creates interesting practical challenges. If the deceased person had a common name, or if their name was similar to everyday words, the community might temporarily avoid those words or create substitutes. It's a profound recognition of the power of language to evoke presence, memory, emotion. Saying someone's name is, in a way, invoking them, bringing them into consciousness, into conversation, into shared space. And there are superstitions about speaking of certain things. In many maritime cultures, there are topics that should not be mentioned on ships. Never say sink, drown, or shipwreck aboard. Pronouncing these words is invoking the possibility, tempting fate. Instead, euphemisms are used: go down, encounter trouble, have difficulties, never mention rabbits, pigs, or priests on ships, all considered extremely unlucky. If you need to refer to them, you use substitutes: long-eared animals, curly-haired animals, men in black. Why these specific animals and people? The explanations vary. Rabbits were associated with witches who could transform into them. Pigs were seen as impure or associated with storms for obscure reasons. Priests were associated with funerals and death. These superstitions created a coded language aboard ships, a way of speaking that avoided invoking bad luck while still allowing necessary communication. And there are superstitions about speaking of illnesses. In many cultures, there's a belief that speaking about a disease can invoke it, bring it into your life. Don't talk about it, you'll attract it. Have you heard this? It's the idea that words have creative power, that naming something is giving it existence, or at least attention that can manifest it. This belief has deep roots. In magical traditions around the world, knowing the true name of something, a disease, a demon, a spirit, gives power over it, but also creates a connection. Pronouncing the name opens a channel. There's also psychological logic. Constantly talking about diseases, disasters, fears can increase anxiety, create hypervigilance, even affect health through stress. Avoiding talking about these things can be a form of psychological protection. But there's a delicate balance. Avoiding talking about real problems, diseases, difficulties, fears, can prevent us from seeking help, from processing emotions, from preparing adequately. The taboo can become harmful. Modern cultures are increasingly recognizing the importance of speaking openly about mental health, diseases, challenges, breaking ancient taboos in favor of honest communication. It's a fascinating tension between protective superstition and practical necessity. There are also superstitions about compliments. In many cultures, complimenting something or someone excessively can attract the evil eye, envy that causes harm. That's why, in some traditions, compliments are always followed by verbal protections. In the Middle East, after complimenting a child, you might say, "Mashallah, what God willed," acknowledging that the child's beauty or health is a divine gift, not something that can be envied. In some Mediterranean cultures, after complimenting something, you might spit 3 times or make the sound of spitting to ward off the evil eye. And there's the practice of including a small intentional flaw in compliments. What a beautiful child with that funny little nose. The mentioned flaw protects against excessive envy. These practices acknowledge that positive words, paradoxically, can have negative effects if they attract envy. It's a careful navigation between expressing admiration and protecting against unwanted consequences. There are also superstitions about voicing plans aloud. Don't tell your plans before you accomplish them. or they won't happen. And this belief is widespread. The superstitious logic is that speaking about plans prematurely attracts forces that will prevent them. You're tempting fate, being presumptuous, assuming success before you've earned it. But there's also real psychological logic. Studies show that talking about goals before achieving them can reduce motivation. When you tell someone about a plan, your brain receives a small dose of satisfaction, social recognition, validation, without having done the actual work. This can diminish the urgency to actually execute the plan. Keeping plans private until they're well underway can, therefore, increase the probability of success, not through magic, but through motivational psychology. The superstition achieves a positive result through a different mechanism than it believes. And there are superstitions about specific words in specific contexts. In some Asian cultures, the number 4 is avoided because its pronunciation is similar to the word death. This extends to avoiding saying the number aloud in certain contexts: hospitals, weddings, celebrations. Buildings skip the 4th floor just as they skip the 13th in Western cultures. Hotel rooms avoid the number 4. Gifts are never given in sets of 4. It's a fascinating example of how phonetics, the sound of a word, can create superstition, even when the meaning is completely different. The number 4 has no inherent connection to death, it just sounds similar in certain languages. But this phonetic similarity is enough to create powerful taboo, and there's the superstition about saying goodbye or never again. In many cultures, there are specific forms of farewell that should be avoided because they sound too final, too permanent. Instead of goodbye, which originally means God be with you, a permanent farewell, many cultures prefer see you soon, see you later, until later, farewells that assume future reunion. The belief is that words shape reality. If you say a final farewell, you can make it final. If you say a temporary farewell, you guarantee there will be reunion. It's a form of magical thinking. The idea that language doesn't just describe reality, but creates it. And while this isn't literally true, there's a deeper truth. The words we choose shape our expectations, our emotions, our behaviors, and through this, influence outcomes. If you say goodbye to someone as if you'll never see them again, you might unconsciously not make effort to stay in touch. If you say goodbye assuming reunion, you might be more likely to reach out to the person to keep the relationship alive. Words don't have magical power, but they have psychological, social, emotional power. And that power is real. All these linguistic superstitions about what to say, what not to say, how to say it, reflect a profound recognition that language matters, that words are not just empty sounds, but acts with consequences. And in a world where communication is increasingly fast, casual, disposable, text messages, social media posts, rushed comments, perhaps there's wisdom in superstitions that remind us to be careful with our words. Not because they literally invoke destiny or attract bad luck, but because they affect people, shape relationships, create emotional realities. Being intentional with language, thinking before speaking, choosing words carefully, recognizing their weight, is not superstition. It's wisdom, but there is one final category of superstitions that deserves exploration, those related not to what we do, say, or give, but to what happens to us. Signs, omens, coincidences that we interpret as messages from the universe. And the way we read these signs reveals much about our fundamental human need to find meaning in a world that is often chaotic and unpredictable. You are thinking about someone you haven't seen in years, and suddenly your phone rings. It's exactly that person. A song you associate with a specific moment in your life starts playing on the radio just when you're remembering that moment. You see the same number repeatedly, it on the clock, on license plates, on receipts, and you start wondering if it means something. Are they coincidences or are they signs? Humanity has always sought meaning in patterns, in coincidences, in events that seem too significant to be random. And throughout history, we have developed elaborate systems to interpret these supposed signs. From formal divination to everyday superstitions about what certain events mean. Let's start with one of the most common interpretations of signs: itches and what they supposedly predict. Itching in the palm of your right hand means money is coming. Itching in the palm of your left hand means money is going out. Itching on your nose means a visit is coming, or you're going to fight with someone. Itching on your right ear means someone is speaking well of you. Left ear, speaking badly. These interpretations vary from culture to culture, but the principle is the same. Random bodily sensations are read as messages, as omens of future events. Why do we do this? Because our brain is a pattern detection machine. We evolved to find connections, to see causes and effects, because on the African savanna, recognizing that movement in the grass could be a predator kept our ancestors alive. But this ability has a side effect. We see patterns even where they don't exist. We see faces in clouds, hear messages in random noise, find meaning in coincidences. When your hand itches and, days later, you receive unexpected money, your brain creates a connection. You remember the itch. You forget the hundreds of times your hand itched and nothing happened. It's confirmation bias in action, but there's something psychologically powerful about believing in signs. It gives us a sense that the universe is communicating with us, that we're not alone, that there's an underlying order to apparent chaos. And there are signs that are interpreted as omens of specific events. Birds, for example, have been read as messengers for millennia. Seeing a single raven is bad luck. Seeing 2 ravens is luck. Seeing 3 ravens is a wedding. Seeing 4 ravens is a birth. There's even a traditional English rhyme that catalogues the meaning of different numbers of ravens. Why ravens specifically? Because they're intelligent, observant, associated with death by eating carrion, and have a striking presence. They seem to be paying attention to you. And when something seems to be paying attention, it's easy to believe it's trying to communicate something. White doves are signs of peace, love, divine messages. Owls are wisdom in some cultures, omens of death in others. Swallows returning are signs of spring, renewal, hope. Each culture has its own system of interpreting birds. Ornithomancy, divination, through birds, is one of the oldest forms of omen reading. And there are signs related to natural events. Rainbows, for example, are almost universally interpreted as positive signs, divine promises, bridges between worlds, symbols of hope after storms. This interpretation has deep roots. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, the rainbow is the sign of God's covenant with Noah after the flood, a promise that he would never again destroy the earth with water. It's a symbol of divine mercy, of new beginnings. But even outside religious contexts, rainbows evoke wonder. They're rare, beautiful, ephemeral. They appear after storms, marking the transition from darkness to light. It's natural that they're interpreted as positive signs. Lightning, on the other hand, is often interpreted as an omen of sudden change, power, even divine wrath. In mythologies around the world, Greek, Norse, Hindu, Native American, lightning is the weapon of gods, manifestations of celestial power. Seeing lightning strike near you was interpreted as a sign that you were being watched by the gods, that your life was about to change dramatically, for better or worse. And there are signs related to animals crossing your path. We've already mentioned black cats, but there are many others. Seeing a butterfly is almost always interpreted positively. Transformation, messages from deceased loved ones, beauty, lightness. Seeing a spider can be luck, especially in the morning, or bad luck, especially at night, depending on the tradition. Seeing a rabbit is generally luck, hence the tradition of saying rabbit, rabbit, rabbit on the first day of the month to guarantee luck throughout the month. This tradition, popular in parts of the United States and United Kingdom, supposedly traces back to Celtic traditions, although the exact origins are obscure. Seeing a snake crossing your path has varied interpretations. In some cultures, snakes are symbols of wisdom, renewal by shedding their skin, healing, the medical symbol of the caduceus. In others, especially in Judeo-Christian traditions, snakes are symbols of temptation, deception, danger. The same animal, radically different meanings depending on cultural context. And there are signs related to numbers. Numerology, the belief that numbers have mystical meanings, is practiced in some form in practically all cultures. Seeing 11:11 on the clock is often interpreted as an especially powerful sign, a moment to make a wish, a cosmic alignment, a message that you're on the right path. Why? Because it's a visually striking, symmetrical pattern, rare to notice. You'd have to look at the clock at that specific minute. Seeing repeated numbers, 222, 333, 444, is interpreted by some as angel numbers, messages from spiritual guides. Each number has its supposed meaning. 111 means new beginnings, 222 means balance, 333 means spiritual protection, and so on. These interpretations are modern, popularized by contemporary spiritual movements, but they reflect an ancient impulse, the search for meaning in numerical patterns. And there's a psychological explanation for why we see these numbers repeatedly. Attention bias. Once you start looking for a specific pattern, say 11:11, you naturally pay more attention when you see it. You look at the clock dozens of times a day, but only notice and remember when it's 11:11. This creates the illusion that you're seeing it with impossible frequency. It's the same mechanism that makes you notice a specific car model everywhere after deciding you want to buy one. The car was always there, you just weren't paying attention before. But knowing the psychological explanation doesn't necessarily diminish the emotional power of the experience. Seeing 11:11 repeatedly can still seem significant, can still bring comfort or a sense of connection, even if you understand its cognitive bias. Are you discovering how your own brain creates patterns and meanings? If these revelations are changing the way you see your daily experiences, leave a like and subscribe to continue exploring the mysteries of the human mind and the beliefs we carry. Comment, which sign have you ever interpreted as a message from the universe? There are also signs related to dreams. Dream interpretation, or neuromancy, is one of the oldest divination practices of humanity. Dreaming of teeth falling out is often interpreted as an omen of death or loss. Dreaming of water can mean emotions, depending on whether the water is calm or turbulent. Dreaming of snakes can mean betrayal or transformation, or healing, depending on context and culture. Books of dream interpretation have existed for millennia. The most famous is probably that of Artemidorus of Daldis, written in the 2nd century AD, which catalogued the meanings of hundreds of dream symbols. Freud and Jung, in the 20th century, brought dream interpretation into psychology, arguing that dreams reveal unconscious contents, not omens of the future, but insights into the present psychological state. But the popular belief that dreams predict the future persists, and there's a psychological reason for this. Dreams often reflect concerns, anxieties, desires that are already in our conscious or unconscious mind. When something we dreamed happens, it's often because we were already, in some way, expecting or fearing it. Dreaming of someone's death and then that person dying seems premonitory. But if the person was sick or elderly or in a dangerous situation, your unconscious was already processing the possibility of loss. The dream didn't predict the future, it reflected present concerns, and there's the phenomenon of déjà vu, the sensation that you've already lived a specific moment before. Many people interpret déjà vu as evidence of premonition, of past lives, of time travel, of parallel universes. The neurological explanation is less mystical but fascinating. Déjà vu probably occurs when there's a small delay in information processing between different parts of the brain. You experience something and milliseconds later, your brain processes it again, creating the sensation that you've seen it before. It's a neurological glitch, not a cosmic message. But the experience is so strange, so disconcerting, that it's understandable that people seek extraordinary explanations. And there are signs that are completely created by us, deliberate divination rituals, flipping coins, pulling flower petals, he loves me not, opening books randomly to receive messages, bibliomancy, reading tea leaves, interpreting tarot cards. These methods are admittedly random, and yet people find meaning in them. Why? One explanation is the Forer effect or Barnum effect. Vague and general descriptions are interpreted as personally significant. Tarot readings, horoscopes, personality readings often use statements that apply to most people, but that each person interprets as specifically about themselves. You have great untapped potential. Who doesn't identify with that? You sometimes doubt your decisions with the universal. You value freedom and independence. Most people say yes. These statements seem deeply personal, but they're statistically applicable to most humans. Another explanation is that these rituals serve as tools for reflection. When you consult tarot cards, you're not really receiving mystical messages. You're creating a space to think about your life, ask questions, consider perspectives. The cards are a mirror, not a window to the future, and there's value in that. Divination rituals can be tools for self-knowledge even if they're not literally prophetic. But there's a danger in relying too heavily on signs and omens. It can lead to decision paralysis, to abdication of personal responsibility. If you're always waiting for a sign to make a decision, you may never act. If you attribute all outcomes to signs you ignored or followed, you may not learn from mistakes or recognize your own role in successes. Signs and superstitions are most useful when used as tools for reflection, not as substitutes for critical thinking and intentional action. And perhaps the deepest truth about signs is this: the universe is not sending encoded messages, but we humans are constantly creating meaning. And there's power in that, not mystical power, but psychological, emotional, narrative power. When you interpret a coincidence as a sign, you're saying, my life has meaning, I matter, there's a story being told here and I'm part of it. And perhaps that's what all superstitions, about salt and ladders, cats and mirrors, words and gifts, signs and omens, really do. They transform random existence into meaningful narrative. They tell us that we're not just particles in random motion in an indifferent universe. We are protagonists in stories, connected to ancestral traditions, participants in shared rituals, readers of a world that speaks to us, if we choose to listen. Is it an illusion? Perhaps. But it's a profoundly human illusion, profoundly necessary, because humans don't live by facts alone. We live by meaning, and superstitions in all their forms are technologies of meaning-making. They connect us to the past, orient us in the present, give us hope for the future. They transform the mundane into the magical, the random into the intentional, chaos into cosmos, and perhaps in the end, that's exactly what we need. Not literal truth, but emotional truth. Not precise prediction, but comforting narrative. Not real control over destiny, but a sense that we're not completely adrift. Superstitions are bridges between what we know and what we hope, between what we can control and what we must accept, between the world as it is and the world as we wish it to be. And as long as there is uncertainty, there always will be, we will continue to throw salt over our shoulders, knock on wood, cross our fingers, seek signs in the stars and tea leaves, whisper incantations and perform rituals. Not because they work in the literal sense, but because they make us feel less alone in the vast mystery of existence, and perhaps that's magic enough. And so we arrive at the end of this journey, through the centuries, through cultures, through the beliefs that have shaped, and continue to shape, the way we live, think, and relate to the world around us. Pause for a moment, take a deep breath, think about everything we've discovered together. We started with spilled salt and ended with signs in the sky. We passed through ladders and mirrors, black cats and horseshoes, unspoken words and gifts that should not be given. We explored the fear of Friday the 13th, the power attributed to the moon, the protection sought in amulets and talismans, and in each superstition, in each belief, we found layers. Layers of practical history, safety warnings disguised as curses, economic advice transformed into spiritual taboos, layers of symbolic meaning, objects and actions that represent deeper fears, broader hopes, layers of social function, rituals that connect communities, that transmit values, that create shared identity. But perhaps the deepest layer, the most universal, is this. Superstitions are human attempts to negotiate with uncertainty. We live in a fundamentally unpredictable world. No matter how much we plan, how much we prepare, how much we know, there's always the element of chance, of the unexpected, of the uncontrollable. Diseases arise without warning, accidents happen, relationships end, opportunities appear or disappear for reasons we cannot predict or fully understand, and that's terrifying. Superstitions offer us an illusion of control. If I avoid black cats, I'll be safe. If I throw salt over my shoulder, I'll neutralize bad luck. If I knock on wood, I'll protect my good fortune. If I read the signs correctly, I'll know what's coming. It's an illusion. We know this on some level, but it's a comforting illusion. Because the alternative, accepting that we're fundamentally vulnerable, that chaos can enter our lives at any moment, that there are no rituals that can completely protect us, is almost unbearable. So we perform our little rituals, we follow our little rules, and we feel a little safer, a little more in control, a little less alone in the face of the vast unknown. And there's beauty in that. There's profound humanity in that, because superstitions aren't just about fear, they're also about hope. Hope that the universe isn't completely random, that there are patterns we can learn, that there are ways to influence our destiny, that our actions matter. When you cross your fingers, you're saying, I believe good things can happen. When you make a wish on a shooting star, you're saying, I have dreams and they are valid. When you hold an amulet, you're saying, I deserve protection, I deserve luck, I deserve good things. They're affirmations of self-worth, of hope, of agency, disguised as mystical rituals, and there's connection. When you throw salt over your shoulder, you're performing the same gesture your grandparents performed, that their grandparents performed, that countless generations before performed. You're participating in a tradition that traverses centuries, that connects you to a vast and ancient human lineage. When you say bless you when someone sneezes, you're participating in a ritual of care that traces back to medieval plague, that expresses the same fundamental concern humans have always had for one another, that you be well, that you survive, that you prosper. Superstitions are threads that connect us across time and space. They're shared languages, even when we don't share tongues. They're acknowledgements that despite all our differences, we face the same fundamental fears, the same fundamental hopes, the same fundamental questions about how to live well in an uncertain world. And there's wisdom in them. Not always, not literally, but often in unexpected ways. The superstition of not passing under ladders protects against real accidents. The superstition of not opening umbrellas indoors prevents household damage. The superstition of not sweeping at night avoids losing valuable objects. The superstition of washing hands before eating, which in many cultures has ritual and spiritual dimensions, prevents disease. Many superstitions are practical knowledge transmitted through supernatural narratives. They're folk science, folk psychology, folk medicine, not always correct but often useful, developed through thousands of years of trial and error, of observation and adaptation. And even when they have no practical basis, they often have psychological basis. Luck rituals reduce anxiety, amulets increase confidence, taboos create behavioral structure, signs offer moments of reflection. Placebo works even when we know it's placebo, and superstitions are cultural placebos, psychological tools that work not despite being just beliefs, but precisely because they are beliefs. But there are also dangers. Superstitions can become prisons. They can limit behavior, create unnecessary fear, prevent rational action. They can be used to justify discrimination, persecution, violence, as we saw in witch hunts, in persecution of people with black cats, in irrational fear of certain dates or numbers. They can make us abdicate personal responsibility, attributing outcomes to external forces instead of recognizing our own role. They can make us ignore evidence, reject medical or scientific help, make decisions based on fear instead of reason. Balance, as in so many things, lies in awareness. Participating in superstitions consciously, recognizing them as cultural rituals, as psychological tools, as connections with tradition, can be enriching. Being controlled by them unconsciously, allowing them to dictate your life through fear, is limiting. You can throw salt over your shoulder and smile, acknowledging the tradition without really believing that demons are lurking. You can cross your fingers as a gesture of hope without believing that you're magically influencing the outcome. You can appreciate the history behind a hung horseshoe without believing that it literally wards off evil. It's possible to maintain traditions while abandoning fear. It's possible to honor the past while living rationally in the present. And perhaps that's the most important lesson from this journey. Superstitions are not enemies of reason. They are complements. They are the poetic part of human existence, the part that recognizes that not everything needs to be scientifically explained to have value. There is room for ritual and reason, for tradition and innovation, for emotional magic and literal truth. We are complex creatures, we humans. We are capable of sending probes to other planets and still knocking on wood for luck. We are capable of understanding molecular genetics and still avoiding passing under ladders. We are capable of building artificial intelligences and still making wishes on shooting stars. And there's no contradiction in that. There's only humanity, rich, complex, contradictory, beautiful humanity, because in the end, superstitions aren't about the external world. They're about our internal world. They're about how we feel, how we make sense of things, how we connect with each other and with the generations that came before us. They're about transforming the ordinary into the extraordinary, about finding magic in the mundane, about recognizing that even in an age of science and technology, there is still mystery, still wonder, still things we cannot fully explain, not because they're supernatural, but because they're profoundly, complexly human. So, the next time you spill salt and feel the urge to throw some over your shoulder, do it. Not because you believe in demons, but because you're participating in a millennia-old tradition. Because you're connecting with countless generations of humans who made the same gesture. Because you're acknowledging that there's value in ritual, in tradition, in small acts of hope and protection. And when you see a shooting star, make a wish. Not because you believe the star will grant it, but because articulating a desire is powerful. Because recognizing what you want is the first step toward achieving it. Because there's beauty in pausing, in admiring the cosmos, in allowing yourself a moment of pure, unfiltered hope. And when someone sneezes, say, "Bless you." Not because you believe you're protecting the person's soul, but because you're expressing care, because you're participating in a ritual of human connection. Because, in a world that's often cold and indifferent, small gestures of recognition and care matter. Superstitions, in the end, are reminders. Reminders that we are part of something larger than ourselves, that our lives are intertwined with the lives of countless others across time and space, that the fears and hopes we feel have been felt by billions before us and will be felt by billions after. They are reminders that despite all our knowledge, there is still mystery. Despite all our technology, there is still wonder. Despite all our reason, there is still room for magic. Not literal magic, but the magic of connection, of meaning, of shared narrative. They are reminders that being human is more than being rational. It's also being emotional, social, symbolic, narrative. It's living not just in a world of facts, but in a world of meanings. And as long as there are humans, there will be superstitions. They will evolve, change, adapt, as they always have. New superstitions will arise, reflecting new fears and new hopes. Old superstitions will disappear or transform into something new. But the fundamental impulse will remain. The impulse to find patterns, to create rituals, to seek meaning, to connect through shared beliefs. Because in the end, superstitions aren't about the world out there. They're about us. About who we are, what we value, how we face uncertainty, how we create community, how we find hope. And that, more than any historical fact or scientific explanation, is what makes superstitions worthy of exploration, of understanding, of respect. Even when we don't literally believe in them, they are mirrors. And when we look into them, we see not demons or destiny, but ourselves, in all our human complexity, in all our fear and hope, in all our need for meaning, in a vast and often incomprehensible universe. And there is profound beauty in that. So, as you prepare for sleep, as night wraps you in its gentle embrace, carry with you this reflection. You are part of an ancient and continuing story. A story of humans seeking to understand, seeking to control, seeking to connect, seeking meaning. The superstitions we've explored today are chapters in that story, and you, by knowing them, by reflecting on them, by consciously choosing which to keep and which to let go, are writing the next chapter. You are both heir and creator of tradition, both student and teacher, both skeptic and dreamer, and that is perfectly human. Rest well. Dream deeply, and know that tomorrow when you wake, the world will be full of little rituals, little beliefs, little gestures of hope and protection. Whispers from the past echoing in the present, reminding you that you are never truly alone. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with shooting stars, rainbows after storms, and the quiet certainty that, superstition or not, you have the power to create meaning, to choose hope, to live with intention. The past whispers, but you decide what to hear, and that perhaps is the greatest magic of all.